I am Claire, 32 years old, a quiet library archivist to the outside world, but secretly the owner of a portfolio that could buy my husband's company 3 times over. On the day I filed for divorce, I did not ask for the house, the car, or a single cent of alimony. My only condition was to take his dementia-ridden mother Vivian with me. Derek was so ecstatic to get rid of the woman who raised him that he literally paid me $10,000 to haul her away. He thought he was winning the lottery. He didn't know he was signing away his claim to the $50 million Vanderbilt legacy that Vivian had been hiding in a battered wooden box. Before I tell you how I used that box to destroy him, please hit the subscribe button if you believe that you should never bite the hand that fed you. It began on a humid Tuesday evening in the dining room that I kept immaculate solely to avoid Derek's criticism. The air conditioner hummed a low, expensive purr, masking the uncomfortable silence that had become the soundtrack of our marriage. We were eating lobster bisque, a dish Derek insisted on having because he had read in a men's lifestyle magazine that it was what successful CEOs ate for dinner. He sat at the head of the table wearing a 3-piece Italian suit he had purchased on credit, checking stock prices on his phone while spooning soup into his mouth without tasting it. To his right sat his mother Vivian. Vivian was 72, but she looked much older. Her silver hair was thinning, and her hands carried a permanent tremor that had worsened over the last few months. Derek refused to take her to a specialist, claiming that premium insurance was a waste of money for someone whose brain was already rotting away. I watched her struggle to lift the heavy silver spoon. Her eyes were cloudy, focused on something only she could see, perhaps a memory from 40 years ago when she was strong enough to carry Derek on her shoulders. She was trying so hard to be dignified, to eat without making a mess, because she knew her son was watching. Then it happened. A sudden spasm in her wrist caused the spoon to jerk. The thick orange bisque splashed. It did not just land on the table, it arced through the air and landed squarely on the lapel of Derek's charcoal gray vest. Time seemed to stop. I froze my own spoon halfway to my mouth. Vivian let out a small, terrified gasp, her hand flying to her mouth as the spoon clattered onto the china plate. The sound was sharp and violent in the quiet room. Derek slowly looked down at his chest. The stain was spreading fast, soaking into the expensive fabric like a fresh wound. He did not grab a napkin. He did not check if the hot soup had burned his mother. Instead, his face turned a shade of purple that I had come to associate with his most dangerous moods. "You stupid old hag!" Derek roared. He stood up so abruptly that his heavy oak chair toppled backward, crashing against the hardwood floor with a deafening bang. But that was not enough for him. In a blind rage, he grabbed the edge of the table runner, a silk piece he believed was authentic Hermes, but was actually a high-quality replica I had bought to save money, and he yanked it. Plates, crystal wine glasses, and the tureen of hot soup went flying. The sound of destruction was overwhelming. Expensive porcelain shattered against the walls. The bisque splattered across the white wainscoting like a crime scene. Vivian cowered in her chair, covering her head with her trembling arms, whimpering like a beaten dog. "I am so sorry, Derek," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean to. My hand just slipped. Please don't be mad." Derek ignored her. He was frantically dabbing at his vest with a cloth napkin, his face twisted in disgust. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" he screamed, looming over his shrinking mother. "This is Italian wool. It is worth more than your entire existence right now. You can't even eat like a human being anymore. You eat like an animal, a messy, useless animal." I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my face remained an impassive mask. I had learned long ago that showing emotion only fueled his fire. I walked around the mess, avoiding the jagged shards of porcelain, and placed a hand on Vivian's shoulder. She was shaking so violently that her teeth were chattering. "That is enough, Derek," I said, my voice low and steady. "It was an accident. She has a condition. You know that." He spun on me, his eyes wild. "Don't you dare defend her, Claire. You are just as bad. You coddle her. You treat her like she is a pet instead of a burden. Look at this mess. Who is going to clean this up? The maid is off today. Of course it is you, because that is all you are good for." I knelt on the floor and began picking up the pieces of the broken dinner plates. As I held a shard of the white bone china, I ran my thumb over the jagged edge. These were Wedgwood plates. I knew their value not because Derek told me, but because I was a senior appraiser for one of the city's most exclusive private auction houses, a job I performed under a pseudonym. I knew that the plate I was holding cost $300. I knew that the antique rug soaking up the soup was worth $4,000. And I knew that my husband's startup company was currently drowning in debt information I had gleaned from glancing at his carelessly discarded bank statements. I picked up the pieces one by one, calculating the total cost of his temper tantrum. It was roughly $600 in damages in under 10 seconds. Derek was still pacing, ranting to the ceiling. I am sick of this. I work 12 hours a day to pay the mortgage on this house, to put food on this table, and I come home to this. I come home to a nursery for geriatrics. He pointed a finger at Vivian, who was now weeping silently, tears tracking through the wrinkles on her cheeks. She is a parasite, Claire. Do you hear me? A parasite. She sucks the resources dry. She contributes nothing. She just takes up space and ruins nice things. I stood up holding a handful of broken china. I walked over to the trash can and dropped the pieces in. The sound was final. I turned to look at him. She is your mother, I said. She worked 2 jobs to put you through college. She sold her house to give you the seed money for your first business. You seem to have forgotten that. I don't care what she did 20 years ago. Derek spat, ripping the vest off and throwing it onto the soup-covered floor. I care about now. And right now she is an anchor around my neck, and you are the chain holding her there. He walked up to me, invading my personal space until I could smell the stale coffee and expensive cologne on his breath. He lowered his voice to a menacing whisper, the kind that was meant to terrify me into submission. I am done, Claire. I am done living in a nursing home. You have a choice to make. You have exactly 1 week. He gestured vaguely at his mother, who was still trembling in her chair. You figure out what to do with her. Put her in a state facility. Put her in a shelter. I don't care if you leave her on a park bench, but you get her out of my house. He paused, letting the silence stretch out heavy and suffocating. If she is not gone by next Tuesday, then you can pack your bags and go with her. I will not live like this anymore. It is her or me, Claire. Choose. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the dining room, kicking a piece of broken plate as he went. I heard his heavy footsteps thudding up the stairs, followed by the slam of the bedroom door that shook the chandelier above us. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner and Vivian's soft sobbing. I looked at the mess on the floor. I looked at the man's vest lying in the puddle of orange soup. And then I looked at my mother-in-law. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with terror and shame. I will go. Claire, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't want to cause trouble. I will go to the shelter. I walked over to her, taking a napkin and gently wiping a spot of soup from her cheek. I looked at the door where my husband had just disappeared. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me. He thought he had given me an ultimatum. He thought he had trapped me. No, Mom, I said softly, a plan forming in my mind with dangerous precision. You are not going to a shelter. We are going to teach him a lesson about value. I did not know it then, but that spilled soup was the most expensive mistake Derek would ever make. The war had just begun, and he had no idea he was fighting a general disguised as a foot soldier. 2 days after the dinner incident, the doorbell rang. It was not a polite request for entry. It was a long, impatient press that echoed through the house like a command. I did not need to check the security camera to know who it was. Only one person rang a doorbell with that much entitlement. Chloe, my sister-in-law, swept into the foyer before I had even fully opened the door. She brought with her a gust of overwhelming perfume and the chaotic energy of a woman who believed the world owed her a living. Trailing behind her was Marcus, her husband. Marcus was a tall, dignified man with kind eyes and the patience of a saint. He was a corporate attorney, brilliant and hardworking, yet in this family he was treated little better than a hired driver. Chloe did not say hello. She bypassed me entirely, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor as she headed straight for the living room, where Vivian was sitting in her rocking chair, staring out the window at the garden she was no longer allowed to tend. Well, look at this, Chloe announced, throwing her designer handbag onto the sofa. The house is still standing. I half expected to find it burned down after what Derek told me. Marcus paused at the door, giving me an apologetic nod. Hello, Claire, he said softly. How are you holding up? I am fine, Marcus, I replied, my voice neutral. Just another day. I walked into the living room to find Chloe already looming over her mother. Vivian shrank back into her chair, clutching her knitting needles as if they were shields. So Mom Chloe started crossing her arms. Derek says, you are becoming a liability. Spilling soup, ruining suits. You know, Derek is trying to build an empire, right? He doesn't need a toddler in a 70-year-old body messing up his focus. Chloe, Marcus said, stepping forward. That is enough. Be respectful. Chloe spun around, her eyes flashing. Respectful, Marcus, look at this place. Look at the stress Derek is under. You wouldn't understand. You just handle paperwork. Derek is a visionary. He needs a stress-free environment. And honestly, Mom has plenty of assets just sitting around gathering dust. Before anyone could stop her, Chloe marched over to the antique mahogany cabinet in the corner. This was Vivian's private space, where she kept the few mementos she had brought from her old life. Chloe yanked the drawer open. The wood groaned in protest. What are you doing? Vivian cried out, her voice thin and trembling. Please, Chloe, those are private. Oh, stop it, Chloe snapped, rummaging through the contents with careless hands. I need capital, Mom. My online boutique is about to take off, but I need an inventory injection, and you have all this old junk just sitting here. She pulled out a velvet jewelry box. My breath hitched. I knew that box. It contained a sapphire and diamond brooch that had belonged to Vivian's grandmother. To the untrained eye, it looked heavy and old-fashioned. To me, a professional appraiser. I knew it was an authentic Art Deco piece from 1925, featuring unheated cashmere sapphires. It was easily worth $15,000 at auction. Chloe popped the lid open and scoffed. Look at this. Gaudy. Who even wears this stuff anymore? But the stones look real enough. I bet the pawn shop downtown would give me $500 for the gold setting. That is enough to buy my domain name and some initial stock. No, Vivian wailed, trying to stand up, but failing as her weak knees gave way. That was your great-grandmother's. It is not for sale. It is if you want to pay for your keep, Chloe retorted, tossing the priceless brooch into her own purse like it was a pack of gum. Consider it rent, Mom. Chloe put it back. Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. This is theft. You cannot just walk into someone's house and take their property. It is illegal and it is morally bankrupt. Chloe laughed, a shrill grating sound. She looked at Derek, who had just walked in from his home office, holding a tumbler of whiskey. Derek, tell your brother-in-law to calm down. He is acting like he is in a courtroom again. Derek took a sip of his drink, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk. Relax, Marcus. It is family business. And technically, since Mom is mentally incompetent, her assets are under our management. If Chloe needs a loan to start a business, the family provides. Marcus stiffened. I saw his jaw clench. He was a black man who had fought his way to the top of a prestigious law firm, battling prejudice every step of the way. He knew exactly what the law said about capacity and theft. But he also knew his place in this toxic hierarchy. She is not incompetent, Derek Marcus argued, though the fight was leaving his voice. She is frail. There is a difference. And selling an heirloom for $500 when it is clearly worth more is not management. It is stupidity. The room went deadly silent. Derek pushed off the doorframe, his face darkening. Careful, Marcus, Derek warned. Don't forget who you are talking to. You might be a big-shot lawyer out there, but in here you are just the guy who got lucky that my sister has a thing for diversity. Don't pretend you understand how old money works. Chloe giggled, patting Marcus on the cheek condescendingly. Yeah, babe, you are cute when you try to be the hero. But let the real adults handle the finances. You just stick to reading contracts. I stood in the corner blending into the wallpaper, but my mind was racing. I watched Marcus. I saw the humiliation burn in his eyes. I saw his hands ball into fists at his sides, then slowly release. He was trapped. He loved Chloe for reasons I could not fathom, perhaps out of a sense of loyalty or habit, but he despised her family. And in that moment, I saw it. The crack in the foundation. Marcus was not one of them. He was a hostage, just like me. I caught Marcus's eye. For a split second, our gazes locked. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and shared misery. He expected me to look away, to be the submissive housewife. Instead, I held his gaze. I let my mask slip just a fraction of an inch, revealing a cold, hard intelligence. I saw him blink, surprised. He realized then that I was not just watching. I was recording. I was analyzing. I broke eye contact and turned back to Chloe, who was now bored with the jewelry box. "So the solution," Chloe announced, dusting off her hands. "Derek says you guys are done playing nurse. And honestly, it is embarrassing. I told my friends you were putting her in a luxury suite, but we all know the funds are tight since Derek's latest venture is taking its time to yield returns." She reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a glossy tri-fold brochure. She didn't hand it to me. She flicked her wrist, tossing it through the air. The brochure fluttered poorly, hitting my chest before sliding down to the floor at my feet. I looked down. The cover showed a generic stock photo of smiling elderly people, but the name of the facility sent a chill down my spine. Sunnyvale Care Center. It was a state-funded facility 3 towns over. I knew it well from my research. It had been cited twice in the last year for health code violations. It was understaffed, smelling permanently of bleach and despair, where patients were sedated to keep them quiet because there weren't enough nurses to check on them. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though fury was boiling in my veins. "It is the answer to your prayers," Chloe said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "It is state-subsidized, meaning it is free. Well, almost free. They take her Social Security check and we don't have to pay a dime. They have a bed opening next Tuesday. You want to put your mother in Sunnyvale?" I asked, looking at Derek. "You know they have a bedbug infestation report from last month, right?" Derek shrugged, swirling the ice in his glass. "It is a bed, Claire. She sleeps 18 hours a day anyway. What does she care if the sheets are Egyptian cotton or polyester?" Marcus looked at the brochure on the floor, then at his wife. "Chloe, that place is a hole. I wouldn't put a dog in there." "We can afford better. I can pay for a private nurse." "No," Chloe shrieked, stomping her foot. "We are not spending your bonus on a nurse, Marcus. That money is for our trip to Cabo and for my inventory. Why do you always put her first? She is barely a person anymore." She turned to me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Pick it up, Claire." I didn't move. I said, "Pick it up," Chloe barked. "That is your new assignment. You get her packed, you get her paperwork signed, and you get her into that van next Tuesday. If she is still here when I come back from my nail appointment next week, I am going to make your life a living hell. Although looking at you dressed in those rags, maybe you are already there." I slowly bent down and picked up the brochure. The paper felt cheap and waxy in my hands. I looked at the smiling stock photo faces, thinking of the $50 million sitting in the trust fund that these idiots were too arrogant to discover. I looked at Vivian, who had gone silent, her face pale as a ghost. She understood. Her own children were discarding her like broken furniture. I looked at Marcus, who looked like he wanted to vomit. And finally, I looked at Derek and Chloe. They were smirking, united in their cruelty, proud of their financial prudence. "Fine," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I will take care of it." "Good girl," Chloe sneered. "See? She can be trained." As they turned to leave, laughing about some party they were attending that night, I clutched the brochure so tightly my knuckles turned white. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was accepting their garbage. But I wasn't just holding a brochure. I was holding evidence. I was holding the final justification I needed. I looked at the back of Marcus's head as he walked out the door, his shoulders slumped. I knew then that when I burned this house to the ground, I might just leave a window open for him to escape. But for Derek and Chloe, I was going to bolt the door shut. Next Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. The following evening, the humiliation escalated from verbal abuse to physical displacement. I was in the kitchen preparing a soft broth for Vivian because her hands were still too shaky to manage solid food when the front door opened. It wasn't just Derek. I heard the click-clack of stilettos that cost more than my car, followed by a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Derek walked in, loosening his tie, looking more energized than he had in months. Hanging on his arm was Sienna, his new marketing director. I knew Sienna. I had done a background check on her the week she was hired. She was 24, ambitious, and had a history of dating her superiors to fast-track her career. She was wearing a dress that was inappropriate for a business meeting, but perfect for a home invasion. Honey, Derek announced, his voice booming with false cheer. I brought Sienna over to brainstorm some rebranding strategies. We need a fresh environment. Sienna didn't look at me. She looked at the granite countertops, the high ceilings, and the crystal chandelier with a critical, appraising eye. She was marking her territory. Nice place, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. A bit dated with the decor, though. We could definitely modernize this. Open concept would do wonders for the flow. She walked past me as if I were the help, heading straight for the hallway leading to the guest suite on the first floor. This was Vivian's room. We had moved her there 3 years ago because she could no longer manage the stairs. It was a beautiful room with large windows facing the garden filled with light and the few comforts Vivian had left. Sienna pushed the door open without knocking. Vivian was resting in her armchair listening to an audiobook. She jumped when the door swung open, clutching her chest. "Oh, wow." Sienna wrinkled her nose, waving her hand in front of her face. "It smells like ointment and old paper in here. It is so heavy. It feels like a hospital waiting room." Derek stepped up beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Yeah, Mom has a lot of medicines." "It lingers." Sienna turned to him, pouting playfully. "You know what? This room would be perfect for Derek, a home gym. The natural light is amazing for yoga, and it is right off the kitchen for protein shakes. Imagine a Peloton right there by the window. It would totally fit the new dynamic lifestyle brand we are building for you." Derek looked at the room, then at Sienna. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He wanted to impress her. He wanted to be the alpha male who made things happen instantly. "You are right," he said. "I have been saying I need to get back in shape. This space is wasted on storage." He didn't say wasted on his mother. He said wasted on storage. I stepped forward, placing myself between them and Vivian. "Derek, this is your mother's bedroom. She cannot climb the stairs. Where do you expect her to sleep?" Derek didn't even blink. "The basement is finished, Claire. It has a bed, it has a bathroom, it is perfectly livable. Besides, it is quieter down there. She likes quiet. The basement was a finished storage area, yes. But it was underground. It was damp, consistently 10 degrees colder than the rest of the house, and the only windows were tiny slits at ground level that looked out at dirt and car tires. It was a concrete box. "You cannot be serious," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "It is freezing down there. Her arthritis will flare up. This is cruel even for you." Sienna sighed, checking her manicured nails. "Derek, surely we can make a sacrifice for the greater good of the company. If he is stressed, the business suffers." "If the business suffers, no one eats. It is simple economics." Derek nodded, his face hardening. "Claire, I told you yesterday, you have a week to get her out of the house. Moving her downstairs is actually a kindness. It buys you a few days to find that state facility Chloe talked about. Now help her pack. I want this room cleared by tonight. Sienna wants to measure for the mats." The cruelty was swift and mechanical. Derek made me pack Vivian's clothes into trash bags because he didn't want to wait for boxes. We walked Vivian to the basement door. She was silent, her eyes wide and wet, moving like a prisoner being transferred to solitary confinement. She leaned heavily on me, her frail body shaking. As we reached the top of the basement stairs, Derek stopped us. He turned to Sienna, who was leaning against the wall, smiling like a cat who had just eaten the canary. "Is this better?" he asked her. "Much better," she purred. "You are such a man of action, Derek. That is what I love about you." And right there, with his mother standing at the precipice of the dark stairs holding a trash bag of her belongings, Derek leaned in and kissed Sienna. It wasn't a quick peck. It was deep, passionate, and performative. He was showing us that we were the past, and she was the future. He was showing his mother that her comfort meant less to him than his mistress's whim. Vivian looked away, a tear sliding down her cheek. I tightened my grip on her arm, not to hurt her, but to steady myself. "Come on, Mom," I whispered. "Let's go downstairs. I will make it warm for you." I led her down into the gloom, leaving the sound of their laughter above us. As I settled her onto the stiff mattress of the spare bed, surrounded by the smell of mildew and cold concrete, I knew the clock was ticking. But they had made a mistake. They thought by burying us in the basement they were silencing us. They forgot that seeds also start in the dark before they rise to break through the earth. Later that night, the temperature dropped. The basement heating unit was old and barely functional, rattling uselessly in the corner. I had piled every blanket I could find onto Vivian, but the dampness of the underground room seeped into everything. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the sound of shallow, ragged breathing. I rolled off the air mattress I had set up on the floor and rushed to Vivian's side. Her skin was burning hot to the touch, yet she was shivering so violently that the metal frame of the bed was rattling. Her eyes were rolled back in her head, and she was muttering incoherently. "Mom, Vivian." I tapped her cheek. She didn't respond. Her body convulsed in a small seizure, her limbs jerking uncontrollably. This wasn't just a fever. It was a reaction to the stress, the cold, and the abrupt change in her medication schedule that Derek had disrupted. I scrambled for my phone, the one Derek paid the bill for. The screen was dead. No signal. A message flashed: SIM card not provisioned. He had cut my service. He had actually taken the time to log into the provider's portal and disconnect me to ensure I couldn't call a lawyer or his sister. Panic flared in my chest. I ran up the basement stairs barefoot on the cold wood. I pounded on the door leading to the main hallway, but it was locked from the other side. They had locked us in. I ran to the side door that led to the garage, tore it open, and sprinted through the dark house. I could hear music coming from the master bedroom upstairs. I took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the hallway. I didn't knock. I threw the master bedroom door open. The room smelled of expensive candles and sweat. Derek and Sienna were in bed, the sheets tangled around them. They scrambled up as the light from the hallway flooded the room. "What the hell?" Derek shouted, pulling the sheet up. "Are you insane? Get out!" "Derek, it is your mother," I screamed, ignoring Sienna's gasp of indignation. "She is burning up. She's having a seizure. I think she's going into shock. You need to call 911. My phone isn't working." Derek rubbed his eyes, looking annoyed rather than concerned. He glanced at the digital clock. "It is 2 in the morning, Claire. She probably just has a flu. Give her some Tylenol and shut up." "She is shaking, Derek. She is unconscious. We need an ambulance." Now Derek sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "Do you know how much an ambulance ride costs?" he asked. "It is $5,000 out of pocket because her insurance lapsed last week. I am not spending $5,000 for a ride to the hospital just so they can tell us she is old and dehydrated. You canceled her insurance." I stared at him, horror washing over me. "She is dying." "Derek, people die." "Claire," he shouted back, his face twisting into a snarl. "She is 72. She has lived her life. I am not bankrupting my future to extend her misery by another week. Now get out of my room, go back to the basement and deal with it. If you wake me up again, you are both out on the street tonight." Sienna giggled nervously. "Babe, maybe you should just go check." Derek cut her off. "No. If we coddle them, they will never leave. Go, Claire. Close the door." He lay back down and pulled the duvet over his head. I stood there for a second, looking at the lump in the bed that was my husband. I looked at Sienna, who turned away, refusing to meet my eyes. The last thread of hope I had for him snapped. The grief I felt for my marriage evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a blade in my mind. I didn't say another word. I didn't beg. I turned around and walked out, closing the door softly behind me. I walked back down the stairs, through the kitchen where the phantom smell of lobster bisque still lingered, and down into the freezing basement. Vivian was still shaking, her breath rattling in her chest. I went to my battered suitcase in the corner, the one Derek called my charity bag. I ripped the lining of the bottom panel. Hidden beneath the fabric was a sleek black hard case. I opened it. Inside lay a satellite phone, the kind used by international expedition leaders and high-level security detail. It was connected to a private encrypted network that bypassed local cell towers entirely. I powered it on. The screen glowed blue in the darkness. I didn't dial 911. 911 would take them to a public hospital where Derek could interfere. I dialed a direct number that hadn't been used in 5 years. "Dr. Aris." I said, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. This is Claire Vanderbilt. Yes. I am activating the protocol. I need the medical extraction team at my location immediately. Bring the mobile ICU unit. And Eris, prepare the legal team. The dormant period is over. We are going to war. I looked at my mother-in-law, who was gasping for air. Hang on, Mom, I whispered, stroking her hair. The cavalry is coming, and they are bringing hell with them. The sun rose over the Hamptons with a deceptive tranquility. To the outside world, the sprawling estate looked peaceful, the manicured lawns glistening with morning dew. But inside the kitchen, the air was thick with the smell of freshly ground coffee and the sour stench of betrayal. I stood in the doorway watching them. Derek was seated at the head of the island, scrolling through his tablet, looking refreshed. He had slept soundly, unbothered by the fact that his mother had been carried out of the basement on a stretcher only hours before. Beside him, Sienna was perched on a bar stool wearing my silk robe. The sight of her in my clothes, drinking from my favorite mug, should have broken me. Instead, it only solidified the icy resolve in my chest. They didn't look up when I entered. To them, I was already a ghost. I was a problem that had been solved, a nuisance that was fading into the background. The county ambulance came early, Derek said without looking away from his screen. I heard the sirens. Good job handling that. I assume you found a place that accepts Medicaid pending applications. He took a sip of his coffee, completely indifferent to where his mother had actually gone. He didn't know that the ambulance wasn't from the county. He didn't know the paramedics were private contractors I employed, or that Vivian was currently being stabilized in a mobile ICU unit, parked a mile down the road waiting for me. He thought I had simply dumped her at the nearest state hospital. I didn't answer him. I walked forward, the thick envelope in my hand, feeling heavy, not with paper, but with destiny. I slid the envelope across the cold marble countertop. It stopped right next to his hand. What is this? Derek asked, finally looking up. His eyes narrowed. Another bill, I told you, Claire. I'm not paying for her meds. It is not a bill, I said, my voice devoid of any tremor. It is a solution. Derek wiped his hand on a napkin and opened the envelope. He pulled out the document, his eyes scanning the bold header. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He laughed. It was a dry, incredulous sound. He looked at Sienna, shaking his head. Look at this babe. She is divorcing me. Sienna giggled, leaning over his shoulder, her hair brushing against his cheek. Ah, that is cute. She thinks she has leverage. Derek threw the papers back onto the counter, looking at me with a mix of pity and amusement. Claire, be serious. You can't afford a divorce lawyer. Who drafted this? Some legal aid intern you cried to. You have no income, you have no home. If you divorce me, you lose the health insurance, you lose the car, you lose the roof over your head. You will be on the street within an hour. Read it, I said. Just read it. He scoffed, picking the papers up again. He flipped through the pages aggressively, looking for the section where I demanded alimony or half the house or a share of his company. He was ready for a fight. He was ready to crush me with his high-priced lawyers. But as he turned the pages, his frown deepened. He flipped back and forth, confused. Wait, he muttered. Where is the financial affidavit? Where is the demand for spousal support? Sienna grabbed the document from his hands, her eyes scanning rapidly. She was the greedy one. She knew exactly what to look for. Her eyes widened as she reached the asset division section. Derek, look, section 4. Petitioner waives all claims to marital assets. Petitioner waives all claims to real estate property. Petitioner waives right to alimony. She looked up at me, her mouth slightly open. She isn't asking for anything. Derek snatched the papers back. What? That is impossible. He read the line himself, his finger tracing the words. I, Claire Vanderbilt, hereby waive all rights to spousal support and claim 0% of the marital estate. He looked at me, stunned. The arrogance in his face began to warp into suspicion. Is this a trick, he asked. Are you trying to guilt trip me because it won't work? If you sign this, you leave with nothing. The clothes on your back. That is it. You get $0 from the sale of this house. You get 0 shares of my company. I don't want your house, Derek, I said calmly. And I certainly don't want your company. Sienna laughed, a high-pitched sound of pure relief. She hugged Derek's arm, beaming. Oh my God, Derek. She is serious. She is actually this stupid. She just wants out. This is perfect. We don't have to fight her for the house. We don't have to pay her off. It is a clean break. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with malice. You are really doing us a favor. You know that I thought you were going to be a leech until the bitter end. But I guess you finally realized you are worthless. You are smart enough to know you would lose in court anyway. Derek sat back, a smug grin spreading across his face. He felt like he had won the lottery. He had spent years terrified that a divorce would expose his fragile finances or force him to sell his assets. Now here I was, handing him his freedom on a silver platter. You are really pathetic, Claire, he said, shaking his head. You have no self-respect, do you? You let me treat you like dirt, and now you are crawling away without even trying to fight for what is yours. It is sad, really. But hey, I am not going to stop you from destroying your own life. He reached into his jacket pocket searching for a pen. He couldn't find one. Sienna eagerly handed him a gold Mont Blanc pen from the counter. My pen, actually a gift from my father that she had appropriated. Sign it, babe, Sienna urged, practically vibrating with excitement. Before she changes her mind. This saves us hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Derek uncapped the pen. The tip hovered over the signature line. The morning sunlight hit the gold nib, making it shine. He looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with triumph. Goodbye, Claire. Don't come crawling back when you are starving. He lowered the pen to the paper. The ink was about to stain the page, sealing his fate and mine. Stop, I said. The word was soft, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a sounding block. Derek paused the pen, touching the paper but not moving. He looked up, annoyed. What now? You having second thoughts? Too late. No, I said. I am not having second thoughts. But there is a clause missing from that draft. Sienna rolled her eyes. Here we go. I knew it. She wants money. How much, Claire? 5 grand. 10, I ignored her. I looked straight into Derek's eyes. I have one condition, a non-negotiable term. Derek sighed, leaning back. Fine. What is it? You want the old Honda? You want your jewelry? No, I said. I don't want the car. I don't want the jewelry. I pointed to the empty space where his mother used to sit. I want Vivian. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Derek stared at me. Sienna stared at me. They looked at each other and then back at me as if I had just asked to take the trash out with me. You want... My mother, Derek asked slowly. I want full legal guardianship, I stated clearly. I want you to sign over all rights. You relinquish your power of attorney. You relinquish your status as her next of kin. You remove her from your insurance, your taxes, your life. You give her to me fully and irrevocably. Derek blinked. He looked at the divorce papers, then at me. You want to take the burden? You want to pay for her meds? You want to change her diapers? You want to pay for her funeral when she croaks in a month? Yes, I said. That is the price of your freedom, Derek. You give me full custody of your mother, and I disappear. You never have to see her or pay for her ever again. A slow smile spread across Derek's face. It was the smile of a man who thought he had just cheated the devil. Sienna started laughing. She wants the old hag. Derek, sign it. She is literally taking the trash out for us. Derek laughed too. He shook his head in disbelief. You are insane, Claire. You are actually insane. You are homeless, broke, and now you want to drag a dying old woman around with you. Fine, you can have her. You are doing me a favor. He pressed the pen to the paper. Wait, I said again. Derek groaned. What now? Moving her is expensive. I lied. I need a truck. I need supplies for the first week. Derek rolled his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, the cash he had withdrawn for the launch party of his failing product. He didn't count it. He just threw it at me. The bills fluttered through the air, landing on the floor at my feet. There is 10 grand, he sneered. Consider it a severance package. Take the money, take the old woman, and get out of my house. I looked at the money on the floor. I looked at the pen moving across the paper, signing away his mother, signing away his future. Deal, I whispered. To make this legally binding, we need to call your lawyer immediately, I said, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. I am not taking her out of this house until I have a signed, notarized affidavit stating that you and Chloe have voluntarily terminated your rights. I want zero chance of you coming back later, claiming I kidnapped a vulnerable adult." Derek laughed, a sound that grated against my nerves. He pulled his phone out, tapping the screen with aggressive glee. "Kidnapped Claire, nobody kidnaps debt, nobody steals a liability. But sure, let's make it official. I want this ironclad too. I don't want the state coming after me for elder neglect once you inevitably run out of money and dump her on the street." He hit the dial button for his sister first. "Chloe, pick up," he said into the speakerphone. "You are not going to believe this." Chloe answered on the second ring, the background noise of a hair salon humming behind her. "What is it? I am under the dryer. Make it quick." "Claire is taking Mom," Derek announced, grinning at Sienna. There was a pause on the line. Then Chloe's voice cut through, sharp and incredulous. "Taking her where?" "To the park." "No," Derek said, his voice dripping with triumph. "Taking her forever. She is divorcing me, asking for zero assets, and her only demand is full legal guardianship of Mom. She wants us to sign over everything. Power of attorney, next of kin status, the whole package." The shriek that came out of the speakerphone was so loud, Sienna actually flinched. "Oh my God," Chloe screamed. "Are you serious? She wants the burden, she wants the diapers and the drool and the medical bills. Is she high?" "She is trying to be a martyr," Derek said, winking at me. "She thinks she is saving us from our moral decline." "Let her have it," Chloe yelled, her excitement palpable even through the static. "Do you know how much money that saves us?" I was looking at the Sunnyvale invoice, Derek. Even with the state subsidy, there were hidden fees for laundry and physical therapy. "This is the best news I have heard all year. Sign it. Sign it before she sobers up and realizes what she is doing." I listened to them, my face remaining an impassive mask. They were discussing their mother like she was a rusted-out car they were trying to unload on a gullible buyer. They calculated her value solely in terms of the expenses she incurred. To them, Vivian was a negative asset, a red line on a spreadsheet that needed to be erased. "I am calling Sterling now," Derek said to Chloe. "I need you to digitally sign the waiver he sends over. Can you do that from your phone? I would sign it in blood if I had to." Chloe laughed. "Do it. I am blocking Mom's number right now. I don't want any guilt trips when she realizes Claire can't feed her." "Bye, Derek. Good riddance to bad rubbish." The line went dead. Derek looked at me, his eyes shining with victory. "See? It is unanimous. The family agrees. You are welcome to her." He dialed his lawyer, Mr. Sterling. Sterling was a cautious, expensive attorney who had managed Derek's business incorporations. He answered in his usual dry professional tone. "Derek, I am in a meeting. This better be urgent." "It is," Derek said. "I need you to draft a waiver immediately. My wife and I are separating. She is waiving all claims to the estate. In exchange, I am transferring full guardianship of my mother Vivian to her. I need a document that absolves me and Chloe of all financial and legal responsibility for Vivian, effective immediately." There was a long silence on the other end. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "Derek, slow down. You are transferring guardianship. That is a complex process. Usually the court appoints a guardian based on the best interest of the incapacitated person. She is taking her voluntarily," Derek interrupted. "Just write it up. She waives alimony. I waive parental duty. Quid pro quo." Derek Sterling's voice became stern. "Listen to me. If you relinquish next of kin status, you are severing the legal tie completely. This means you have no say in her medical care, no visitation rights unless granted, and most importantly, you remove yourself from the line of succession regarding her estate." Derek laughed so hard he choked on his coffee. "Her estate." Sterling, the woman owns a box of knitting needles and a drawer full of expired coupons. Her estate is negative. She has no money. She has no property. She is a drain on my resources. I am not worried about losing my inheritance of $0. "You should be careful," Sterling warned, his lawyerly instincts kicking in. "Assets can be discovered. Policies can exist that you aren't aware of. If you sign a blanket waiver of all past, present, and future claims regarding Vivian and her assets, you are cutting yourself off from anything that might surface. Are you absolutely sure she has nothing?" "I am looking at her empty room right now," Derek said, glancing at the hallway. "She is a vegetable sterling. She doesn't even know her own name half the time. Stop trying to bill me for extra hours of due diligence. I know my mother's finances better than she does. She is broke." But Derek Sterling tried again. "Just draft the damn paper," Derek shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. "I am saving $80,000 a year in care costs by doing this. Do not blow this deal for me. I want the waiver sent to my email in 5 minutes. If you don't do it, I will find a lawyer who will." He hung up the phone and tossed it onto the island. "Lawyers," he muttered to Sienna, "always trying to complicate things to pad their fees. He thinks Mom has a secret stash of gold bars or something." Sienna massaged his shoulders, purring into his ear. "He doesn't know her like you do, baby. You are making the smart business decision. Cut the dead weight. Focus on us. Focus on the company." I stood there silently thanking Mr. Sterling for his competence and thanking Derek's arrogance for overruling it. Sterling had tried. He had explicitly warned him about the inheritance. Derek had rejected it out loud in front of witnesses. A few minutes later, the email pinged on Derek's tablet. He opened the document. It was a standard waiver modified with the specific clauses Derek had demanded. "I, Derek Vanderbilt, hereby irrevocably renounce all rights, titles, and interests in the guardianship and estate of Vivian Vanderbilt. I transfer all decision-making power to Claire Vanderbilt and release myself from any obligation to provide care financial support or maintenance." He didn't even read the fine print. He scrolled to the bottom, signed his name with a flourish using his finger on the screen, and hit send. He spun the tablet around to face me. "Your turn, Savior." I stepped forward. I read the text carefully. It was perfect. It was a complete legal severance. By signing this, Derek was legally becoming a stranger to his own mother. I signed my name next to his. The digital ink solidified our agreement. "There," Derek said, clapping his hands together. "Done. She is your problem now. Get her out of here. I have a gym to build." I looked at him, then at Sienna, who was already browsing yoga mats on her phone. They were celebrating. They were genuinely happy. They believed they had just pulled off the heist of the century, dumping a worthless liability on a foolish woman. I picked up the $10,000 from the floor, placing the stack of bills into my purse. Then I picked up the tablet one last time and forwarded the signed document to my own secure server. "Thank you, Derek," I said softly. "You have no idea what you just did. I don't care what I just did as long as she is gone," he replied, turning his back on me to pour another cup of coffee. "Close the door on your way out. And don't expect a Christmas card." I walked out of the kitchen feeling lighter than I had in years. He called it a burden. I called it a fortune. But the money was secondary. The real victory was knowing that when Vivian opened that wooden box, Derek wouldn't be entitled to a single cent of what was inside. He had sold his birthright for a home gym and a quiet morning. The digital ink on the tablet was barely dry when I made my final move in this chess game. I needed to ensure Derek believed down to his very marrow that I was destitute. If he suspected for even a second that I had resources, his greed would override his desire to get rid of his mother. He would drag out the divorce subpoena my accounts and try to lay claim to the Vanderbilt fortune. I had to play the part of the defeated, penniless housewife one last time. I looked down at my hands, deliberately letting them tremble. It wasn't hard. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made the shaking real, even if the reason behind it was anticipation rather than fear. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice small and broken, "there is just one thing." Derek was already pouring champagne into 2 flutes, his back to me. He groaned, slamming the bottle down on the counter. The foam spilled over, dripping onto the marble. "What is it now, Claire? You have the waiver. You have the old woman. What more could you possibly want?" "I don't have a car," I whispered, staring at the floor. "You leased the BMW in the company name. I can't take it. And I have no cash for a moving truck. I found a rental place that will take cash for a deposit, but..." I let the sentence hang in the air, pathetic and unfinished. Sienna let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She hopped off the bar stool and walked over to me, circling me like a shark inspecting wounded prey. "Oh, this is rich," she sneered. "The princess needs a handout. You were so high and mighty 5 minutes ago demanding custody. Now you are begging for gas money." Derek turned around, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He enjoyed this. This was the cherry on top of his victory sundae. He loved seeing me reduced to begging. It validated every insult he had ever thrown at me. He walked over to his briefcase, which was sitting on the dining table. He clicked the locks open. Inside were stacks of $100 bills wrapped in bank bands. It was the petty cash withdrawal for his product launch party later that evening. Money that belonged to investors. Money he shouldn't be using for personal reasons. But Derek never let rules stop him from showing off. He grabbed a thick stack, $10,000. He walked back to where I stood. He didn't hand it to me. He didn't place it on the counter. He looked me in the eye, his expression filled with absolute contempt, and threw the money at my face. The heavy stack hit my chest with a thud before breaking apart. The band snapped, and 100 crisp bills exploded into the air, fluttering down around me like expensive confetti. "There," Derek said, dusting off his hands as if he had just touched something filthy. "Consider it a severance package, or better yet, call it a sanitation fee." "A sanitation fee," I repeated, watching a bill land on my shoe. "Yeah," he laughed, wrapping his arm around Sienna. "You are taking out the trash for me. My mother is garbage. You are garbage. This is the fee for hauling it to the dump." Sienna clapped her hands, delighted. "That is so generous of you, baby. You are practically a saint." I slowly knelt on the kitchen floor. I didn't look up. I began to gather the bills one by one. To them, this looked like the ultimate humiliation. A woman on her knees scrambling for her husband's scraps while his mistress laughed. But inside my head, the calculator was running. 100, 200, 300. I wasn't picking up charity. I was collecting evidence. I was picking up the final receipt of a transaction that would cost him everything. Every bill I touched was another nail in his coffin. He was using company funds to pay off a spouse to remove a dependent. It was financial fraud, it was abandonment, and it was documented. I gathered the last bill and straightened the stack, tapping it against my palm to align the edges. I stood up, my face completely smooth. I placed the money into my purse right next to the signed waiver. "Thank you, Derek," I said, my voice eerily steady. "This will be more than enough to get us where we are going." "Get out," he said, turning his back on me to toast with Sienna. "And take the back door. I don't want the neighbors seeing you drag your luggage down the driveway. It looks bad for the brand." I looked at his broad back, covered in the expensive shirt I had ironed for him yesterday. I looked at Sienna, who was sipping champagne and whispering in his ear. "Transaction complete," I whispered to myself. I turned and walked toward the basement door. I didn't feel shame. I didn't feel anger. I felt the cold, hard weight of $10,000 in my bag and the infinite lightness of freedom. He had just bought his own destruction, and he had paid cash for it. I went down the basement stairs for the last time. Vivian was sitting on the edge of the bed wearing her coat. She had heard the shouting. She looked terrified, clutching her purse with white-knuckled hands. Is he angry?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No, Mom," I said, crouching down to lock the brakes on her wheelchair. "He isn't angry. He is happy. He thinks he won." I helped her into the chair, tucking a blanket around her legs. I didn't tell her about the money. I didn't tell her about the insults. She didn't need to know that her son had called her garbage. She would find out who she really was soon enough. "We are leaving Vivian. For good." I pulled the handle of my single suitcase with one hand and pushed the wheelchair with the other. It was a struggle to get up the ramp I had installed months ago, but I didn't care. I felt strong. We emerged into the hallway. The house was bright and airy, filled with the morning light that Derek claimed we didn't deserve. I pushed the wheelchair past the living room. I could hear them in the kitchen. The pop of a second champagne cork echoed off the walls. "To the future," Derek shouted. "To a house with no anchors. To us." Sienna cheered. They were celebrating their own demise. I reached the front door. As I opened it, the fresh air hit my face, smelling of pine and ocean salt. I pushed Vivian out onto the porch. Just as I was closing the door, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Marcus. He got out of his sedan looking tired. He had probably come to try and talk sense into Derek one last time, or perhaps to apologize to me for yesterday. He stopped dead when he saw me. He saw the suitcase. He saw Vivian in the wheelchair. He saw the closed door behind me. "Claire," he asked, walking up the steps. "What happened? Did he kick you out?" I looked at Marcus. For the first time, I didn't look at him with the eyes of a victim. I stood tall, my shoulders squared. "No, Marcus." I said, my voice clear and resonant. "I chose to leave." Marcus looked at the door, hearing the laughter from inside. He looked back at me. He was a smart man. He saw the lack of tears. He saw the strange calm set of my jaw. He saw that I wasn't panicked about where I would sleep that night. "He threw you out with nothing." Marcus asked, his voice low. "He gave me exactly what I wanted," I replied. Marcus frowned, confused. He looked at Vivian, then back at me. A flicker of realization passed through his eyes. He sensed that the dynamic had shifted, even if he couldn't see the full picture yet. "Do you need a ride?" he offered. "I can take you to a motel, or a shelter." "Thank you, Marcus," I said genuinely. "You are a good man, but my ride is already here." I pointed toward the street. Marcus turned around. His jaw dropped. Idling at the curb, blocking the entire driveway entrance, was not a moving truck. It was not a taxi. It was a convoy. 3 black armored SUVs with tinted windows sat in a perfect line. They were the kind of vehicles used by heads of state or visiting dignitaries. The engines purred with a low, menacing rumble. As we watched, the doors of the lead and rear vehicles opened in perfect synchronization. 4 men in dark suits and earpieces stepped out. They didn't look like movers. They looked like Secret Service agents. One of them, a tall man with a scar on his chin, walked briskly up the driveway. He ignored Marcus completely. He stopped in front of me and bowed his head slightly. "Mrs. Vanderbilt," he said, his voice deep and respectful. "We are ready for transport. The medical team is in the rear vehicle for your mother-in-law." Marcus looked at the man, then at the cars, and finally at me. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Claire," he whispered, "who are these people?" I smiled. It was the first real smile I had worn in years. "Staff, Marcus. Just staff." The agent took the wheelchair from me with gentle hands. Another agent appeared and took my suitcase. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking on the pavement. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the window where I knew Derek and Sienna were clinking glasses, oblivious to the fact that their world had just ended. I stopped at the open door of the middle SUV. I turned to Marcus, who was still standing frozen on the driveway. "Tell Derek I said goodbye," I said. "And Marcus, get a good lawyer. You are going to need one when the indictment comes down." I slid into the leather interior of the car. The door closed with a heavy, solid thud, sealing out the noise, the insults, and the poverty of my past life. "Go," I told the driver. As the convoy pulled away, leaving Marcus staring after us in shock, I pulled out my phone. I dialed the number for the bank that held the mortgage on Derek's house. "This is Claire Vanderbilt," I said. "I am calling to exercise the call option on the note I purchased last week." "Yes, foreclose on it. Immediately." The heavy door of the SUV sealed shut with a reassuring, solid thud, instantly cutting off the sounds of the suburbs. The chirping birds, the distant lawnmowers, and the echoing laughter of my husband and his mistress were replaced by a profound, acoustically engineered silence. The air inside the vehicle was cool, filtered, and smelled faintly of bergamot and hand-stitched Italian leather. It was the scent of my old life, the life I had abandoned 5 years ago to marry a man who would eventually discard me like a used wrapper. I leaned back into the plush seat, feeling the tension in my spine begin to dissolve. Beside me, the medical technician in the back seat was already checking Vivian's vitals, adjusting the oxygen flow on a portable tank with practiced efficiency. Vivian sat frozen, her eyes darting around the interior of the car like a trapped bird. She was clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white, her feet dangling slightly off the edge of the seat. The partition between the driver and the passenger cabin lowered with a soft hum. The driver, a man with broad shoulders and graying hair named Sebastian, looked at me through the rearview mirror. I had not seen Sebastian in over 4 years, not since I had instructed him to monitor my assets from a distance while I played the role of the submissive housewife. "Welcome back, Mrs. Vanderbilt," Sebastian said. His voice was deep, respectful, and completely devoid of the condescension I had grown used to. "We have secured the route. The support team is flanking us. Estimated time of arrival to the Sovereign Tower is 45 minutes. "Thank you, Sebastian," I replied. My voice sounded different to my own ears. The tremble was gone. The hesitation was gone. It was the voice of a woman who commanded boardrooms, not a woman who asked for permission to buy groceries. "Please inform the concierge to have the private elevator ready. I do not want to wait in the lobby." "Yes, ma'am," Sebastian said, tapping his earpiece to relay the order. Beside me, Vivian let out a small, terrified whimper. She shrank back against the door, pulling her coat tighter around her thin frame. "Claire," she whispered, her voice shaking, "who are these men? Are we being arrested? Is this the police?" She looked at the tinted windows at the convoy of black cars surrounding us. To her, this didn't look like freedom. It looked like a raid. "Did Derek call the police on us?" she asked, tears welling up in her cloudy eyes. "Because I spilled the soup, I told him I was sorry. I didn't mean to steal the jewelry. Please, Claire, don't let them take me to jail." My heart broke for her. Years of emotional abuse had rewired her brain to expect punishment for her mere existence. She couldn't conceive of a world where she was treated with dignity. She thought power only arrived to hurt her, never to protect her. I reached out and took her hand. Her skin was paper-thin and cold. "Mom, look at me," I said. I didn't use the soft, placating tone I used to use when Derek was shouting. I used a firm, grounding tone, the kind of tone that demanded attention. Vivian looked up, startled by the strength in my voice. "We are not being arrested," I told her, holding her gaze. "These men work for me. They are here to protect us. Derek cannot hurt you anymore. No one can hurt you anymore." She blinked, confused. "They work for... you? But Derek said you have no money. He said you are a charity case. He gave you $10,000 because you are broke." I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of cash Derek had thrown at me. I looked at it with distaste. Derek sees what he wants to see, Mom. He saw a housewife. He saw a victim. He didn't look close enough to see the truth. I pressed the button on the armrest and a hidden compartment opened. I dropped the stack of bills inside and closed it. "We don't need his money," I said. "That $10,000 is meaningless where we are going." Vivian looked around the car again, her fingers tracing the controls on the door panel. Is this a taxi?" "It is very fancy for a taxi." I smiled gently. "No, Mom, this is my car." "But you drive a Honda?" she stammered. "A rusted Honda. I drove a Honda because it made Derek feel big," I explained. "I wore old clothes because it made Derek feel rich. I stayed silent because it made Derek feel smart. But the play is over, Vivian. The curtain has fallen." I turned to look out the window. We were merging onto the highway, leaving the suffocating atmosphere of the suburbs behind. I watched the trees blur past, feeling a sense of exhilaration rising in my chest. For 5 years, I had diminished myself. I had made myself small to fit into the tiny box Derek had built for me. I had hidden my intelligence, my connections, and my family legacy to see if he could love me, not for what I could buy him. I had my answer. He didn't love me. He didn't even like me. And now the beast was waking up. "Sebastian," I said, leaning forward slightly, "connect me to the finance team." "One moment, ma'am." A second later, a crisp female voice filled the cabin through the surround sound speakers. "Mrs. Vanderbilt, we have been expecting your call. Status report, initiate phase 1, I commanded, my eyes fixed on the horizon where the city skyline was beginning to emerge from the mist. "Purchase the outstanding debt on Derek's company. I want to be the majority creditor by noon, and freeze the assets of the shell company holding the house title." "Consider it done," the voice replied. "And regarding the medical team for Mrs. Vivian, have Dr. Aris meet us at the penthouse," I said. "Full workup. I want nutritional therapy started immediately." "Understood." "Welcome back, Claire." The line clicked off. Vivian stared at me with her mouth slightly open. She looked at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. "Claire," she whispered, "you sound like a boss." I squeezed her hand. "I am a boss, Mom. And so are you. You just forgot for a little while." The car sped up the engine, roaring with a power that vibrated through the floorboards. We were approaching the city now. The gray concrete of the highway gave way to the gleaming steel and glass of Manhattan. Vivian pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Look at the buildings," she breathed. "It has been so long since I saw the city. Derek never brought me here. He said it was too expensive to park." "We don't worry about parking anymore," I said. The convoy weaved through the traffic with aggressive precision. Cars moved out of our way. We were a shark moving through a school of minnows. We turned onto 57th Street, known as Billionaires Row. The buildings here scraped the sky monuments to unimaginable wealth and power. The car began to slow down. Sebastian guided the vehicle toward a massive structure of black glass and steel that towered over everything else. It was the Sovereign Tower, the most exclusive residential address in the Western Hemisphere, a place where privacy was the ultimate currency and entry was granted only to those who owned the world, not those who merely lived in it. Vivian looked up, craning her neck to see the top of the building, but it was lost in the clouds. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice hushed. "This looks like a palace." I checked my reflection in the window. The tired, red-rimmed eyes of the woman who had cried in the basement were gone. In their place were the cold, sharp eyes of a predator reclaiming her territory. "We are home, Mom," I said as the car came to a smooth halt. Sebastian put the car in park. Outside, a team of doormen in white gloves was already rushing down the steps, rolling out a red carpet that had been prepared specifically for our arrival. They weren't just opening a door, they were welcoming a queen returning from exile. I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to Vivian. "Are you ready to see what real life looks like?" Before she could answer, the door opened, and the sounds of the city rushed in, not as noise, but as applause. The private elevator to the 92nd floor did not have buttons. It operated solely on retinal scans and voice recognition, a security measure I had installed 5 years ago and hadn't used since the day I met Derek. As the heavy steel doors slid shut, sealing us in a capsule of silence and polished mahogany, I watched the digital floor indicator begin its rapid ascent. Vivian stood pressed against the corner of the elevator car, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terrifying confusion. She was still clutching her battered purse, the only possession she had been allowed to take from the house. To her, this wasn't a return to glory. It was an abduction into a world she didn't understand. She looked at the floor numbers ticking up 10, 20, 40, and her breathing hitched. "Claire," she whispered, gripping my arm with frail fingers. "Where are we going? Is this a government building? Are they going to interrogate us?" I gently pried her fingers from my sleeve and held her hand between both of mine. "No, Mom. This is home." Before she could ask what I meant, the elevator slowed. A soft chime announced our arrival. The doors opened directly into the foyer of the penthouse. The space was breathtaking, designed to intimidate as much as it was to comfort. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic 360-degree view of Manhattan. Central Park looked like a green rectangular patch on a quilt far below. The floors were white Thassos marble heated from beneath, and the air was scented with fresh white lilies and sandalwood. Vivian stepped out, her feet sinking into the plush runner rug. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my heavens," she breathed. "We are in the clouds." Waiting in the foyer was my staff. Elena, my house manager, stood at the front, flanked by 2 nurses in crisp navy blue scrubs, and Dr. Aris, who looked grave and ready. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vanderbilt," Elena said, bowing her head slightly. "We have prepared the master suite for your guest." Vivian shrank back, hiding behind me. "Who are they?" she asked. "They are here to help you feel better," I said. "Elena, please take Mrs. Vivian to the East Wing. Dr. Aris needs to get her vitals immediately, and get her some warm broth. The real kind, not the canned slop Derek bought." I watched as the nurses gently approached Vivian. For a moment she resisted looking at me with panic. "Go with them, Mom." I nodded reassuringly. "I will be right there. I just need to make a phone call." As they led her away down the long gallery-like hallway, I walked into the main salon. I approached the wet bar, which was stocked with bottles worth more than Derek's entire car collection. I selected a bottle of Chateau Margaux, 1996. It was a $5,000 bottle of wine. I poured a glass, the deep red liquid swirling against the crystal. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there in the suburbs, Derek was probably sitting on his patio drinking cheap beer, laughing with Sienna about how I was likely crying in a Motel 6 or sleeping in my car. He probably imagined me counting coins to buy a hamburger. The thought made me smile. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like vengeance, silk and iron. I placed the glass on a coaster and picked up my secure tablet. It was time to go to work. I had been dormant for too long. My empire had been running on autopilot managed by trustees and algorithms, but now the queen was back on the board. I initiated a video call. The screen flared to life, revealing the face of my personal investment banker, a sharp-eyed man named Julian based in Zurich. Claire, Julian said, not hiding his surprise. It has been years. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need you to execute a purchase order. Julian, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Name it. I want you to buy the debt of a company called Vanderbilt Tech Solutions. It is a small startup currently over-leveraged. They have loans with 3 different mid-tier banks and a line of credit that is maxed out. Julian typed rapidly on his keyboard. I see it. It is garbage, Claire. The financials are a disaster. They are burning cash at an unsustainable rate. Why would you want this toxic asset? I don't want the asset, Julian. I want the leverage. Julian paused. Then a slow smile spread across his face. He understood. Ah, a hostile acquisition of the debt. If you own the notes, you can call them in. Exactly, I said, swirling my wine. Buy it all. Every cent. I want to be the sole creditor. And Julian, do it through the Shell Corporation, the one we used for the Singapore deal. I don't want my name on the paperwork yet. Consider it done, he said. By the time the markets close today, you will own him. I ended the call. I felt a surge of power. With a few sentences, I had just placed a noose around Derek's neck. He wouldn't feel it tightening for a few weeks, but the trap was set. He was living on borrowed time, and I was the lender. I finished my wine and walked toward the east wing. The penthouse was silent, save for the soft hum of the air filtration system. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic, noisy environment of Derek's house, where the television was always blaring and Chloe was always shrieking. Here, there was peace. I entered the master suite. I had given it to Vivian. It was the largest room in the penthouse with its own fireplace and a bathroom the size of an apartment. Vivian was lying in the center of the massive king-sized bed, looking tiny and fragile against the high thread count sheets. She was hooked up to an IV drip, and monitors were beeping softly. Dr. Aris was standing by the bedside reading a chart. He looked up as I entered. His expression was dark. "Claire, can I speak with you in the hallway?" he asked. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Is it bad?" I asked, walking over to the door. We stepped out, and Dr. Aris closed the door gently behind us. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. We ran a full toxicology screen along with the standard blood panels. He began. "Claire, you told me she had dementia. You said she was confused, suffering from memory loss and tremors." "That is what Derek told me," I said. "That is what his doctors said. They said it was early onset Alzheimer's." Dr. Aris shook his head. "It is not Alzheimer's." My heart stopped. "What her brain scans are relatively clear for a woman of her age," he explained, his voice tight with professional anger. "There is some age-related decline, yes, but nothing that explains the severity of her symptoms. The tremors, the confusion, the hallucinations, the weakness, those aren't from dementia." "Then what are they from?" I demanded. Dr. Aris held up the tablet, showing me a graph with a spiking red line. "She is malnourished, severely so. She is dehydrated. But more importantly, we found high levels of heavy metals and a specific class of sedatives in her system. Benzodiazepines." "Sedatives," I whispered. She wasn't prescribed sedatives. She was only supposed to be taking blood pressure medication. "Someone has been feeding her a cocktail of drugs designed to induce confusion and lethargy," Dr. Aris said grimly. "And the food? Claire, her sodium levels are through the roof. It looks like she has been fed a diet consisting almost entirely of processed high-sodium canned goods that were likely expired. It is a slow form of poisoning. It creates symptoms that mimic dementia. The tremors. That is a side effect of the drug interaction. The confusion, that is the sedation. I leaned against the wall, the world spinning. Derek. It made sense. It all made sense. The way he insisted on controlling her medication. The way he refused to let me cook for her, claiming she liked her special soup. The way he refused to take her to a specialist. He wasn't just neglecting her. He was actively keeping her sick. He was drugging his own mother to make her appear incompetent so he could take control of her assets, or so he thought. He didn't know the assets were in a trust he couldn't touch, but he knew enough to want her out of the way. "Can you fix it?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. Dr. Aris nodded. "Now that we know what it is, yes. We are flushing her system now. The IV fluids will handle the dehydration. With proper nutrition and stopping the toxic drugs, the fog will lift. It will take a few weeks, but I expect she will regain significant cognitive function. She will remember Claire. She will be herself again." I looked through the crack in the door at the frail woman sleeping in the bed. She wasn't a burden. She was a victim of a crime. "Thank you, doctor," I said. "Do whatever it takes. Spare no expense." I walked back into the main room and looked out at the city again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the skyscrapers. Derek hadn't just been cruel. He had been criminal. He had poisoned his mother to justify throwing her away. I picked up my phone again. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Prison was too easy for him right now. I wanted him to suffer first. I wanted him to lose everything he had built, everything he loved, and everything he hoped for. I dialed my lawyer. "Start the audit," I said, my voice ice cold, "and find out every single thing Derek has signed in the last 5 years as his mother's power of attorney. We are going to bury him." Inside the room, Vivian stirred in her sleep. She looked peaceful for the first time in years. She was safe now. And as for Derek, he had just declared war on the wrong woman. For 14 days, I watched the fog slowly lift from my mother-in-law's eyes. It was a painstaking process orchestrated by Dr. Aris and his team of specialists. They flushed the heavy metals from her blood, rebalanced her electrolytes, and introduced a nutrient-rich diet that cost more per day than Derek used to spend on her in a month. I sat by her bedside every evening working on my tablet, monitoring the slow, suffocating financial pressure I was applying to Derek's company. But my primary focus was the woman in the bed. I watched as the tremors in her hands subsided. I watched as her skin, once gray and paper-thin, regained a healthy rosy hue. The hollows under her cheekbones filled out. She no longer looked like a frightened ghost haunting her own body. She looked like a woman who was returning from a long, dark journey. On the 15th morning, the sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long, golden beams across the room. I was sitting in the armchair reading a report when a soft voice broke the silence. "Claire." I looked up. Vivian was sitting up in bed, propped against the pillows. Her eyes were clear. The cloudy, confused film that had obscured her iris for years was gone. In its place was a sharp, piercing blue, the eyes of the woman she used to be before Derek and his father had beaten her spirit into submission. "Mom." I put the tablet down and walked to the bed. "Do you know where you are?" Vivian looked around the room, taking in the silk drapes, the marble fireplace, and the view of Central Park stretching out below. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fresh lilies. "We are in the sky," she said softly. "We are safe. And you are not who I thought you were." She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in weeks. She saw the tailored silk blouse I was wearing, the way I held myself with authority, the absence of fear in my posture. "I am still Claire, Mom," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I am just the version of Claire I had to hide to survive in that house." Vivian reached out and took my hand. Her grip was firm, no longer shaking. Tears began to pool in her eyes, spilling over to run down her rejuvenated cheeks. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I am so sorry I didn't stop him. I saw the way he treated you. I saw the way he spoke to you. But I was so weak, Claire. I was so afraid. I thought if I spoke up, he would throw me out. And in the end, he threw me out anyway. You were sick, Vivian, I said firmly. You were poisoned. Derek and his doctors kept you sedated. You couldn't have fought him. But I should have protected you, she sobbed, squeezing my hand. You were the only one. When I was confused, when I spilled things, when I forgot my own name. Everyone else laughed. Chloe laughed. Derek yelled. But you just cleaned it up. You brushed my hair. You made me soup. You stayed. She looked at me with an intensity that pierced my heart. Why did you stay, Claire? You have all this. You could have left years ago. You could have crushed him like a bug. Why did you endure it? I looked out the window, watching a hawk circle the currents above the park. Because I needed to know, I answered honestly. I needed to know if there was anything real in him. I needed to know if he loved me, or if he just loved the idea of a wife. And when I realized he was empty, I stayed for you. Because I knew if I left, you wouldn't survive a month in that basement. Vivian brought my hand to her cheek. You saved my life, she said. Not just my body. You saved my dignity. I remember the ambulance ride. I remember the car. I remember you telling me we were going home. I thought I was dreaming. You are awake now, I said, wiping a tear from her face, and you never have to go back to sleep. You are free. Vivian nodded slowly, drying her eyes. She took a deep breath, composing herself. The frailty was falling away, revealing a core of steel I hadn't known existed. If I am free, she said, her voice dropping to a serious whisper, then it is time to finish this. She pointed to the closet where her few belongings had been stored. Claire, bring me the box. The box I asked. You mean the old wooden one? Yes, she said, her eyes darkening. Derek tried to throw it in the fireplace once. He said it was filled with junk mail and old recipes. He never looked inside. He never cared enough to look. I stood up and went to the closet. I retrieved the battered oak box. It was heavy, the wood scarred and stained, the brass latch tarnished with age. It looked like something you would find at a yard sale for $5. It was the only thing Vivian had fought to keep when we were exiled to the basement. I brought it to the bed and placed it on her lap. Vivian ran her hands over the lid, a strange nostalgic smile playing on her lips. He called me a burden, she whispered. He sold me for $10,000. He thought he was getting rid of a liability. She looked up at me, and for a second she looked dangerous. Open it, Claire. Let's see what my son threw away. I unlatched the brass hook. It opened with a rusty creak that sounded loud in the quiet luxury of the penthouse. I lifted the heavy oak lid. I expected to see old photographs, perhaps some sentimental trinkets, or maybe letters from a long-dead husband. Derek had always dismissed this box as the hoarding of a senile woman. I was wrong. The box was lined with blue velvet. Inside, there was no junk. There were no recipes. There was a stack of documents yellowed with age, but preserved in plastic archival sleeves. On top of the stack sat a heavy iron seal, the kind used to stamp wax on official decrees in the last century. I reached in and pulled out the first document. The paper was thick, bonded parchment. The header was written in elegant calligraphy-style script, but the legal language was sharp and modern. The Vanderbilt Family Trust. I froze. I looked at Vivian. Vanderbilt, I asked. Derek spells his name Vanderbilt, like the university. Vivian smiled a dry, secretive smile. That is the Americanized spelling his father adopted to sound more modern, she explained. But my husband, Derek's father, he came from the original line, the Dutch line, the side of the family that didn't build railroads, the side that built banks. They were quiet. They didn't want fame. They wanted preservation. I turned the page. My eyes widened as I scanned the assets listed in the schedule. This wasn't just a trust fund. This was a holding vehicle for generational wealth. Real estate in Zurich, gold reserves held in Singapore, and the centerpiece? I gasped. 50,000 shares of Class A preferred stock in the Vanderbilt Maritime Group. I looked up at Vivian, my mind racing. As an appraiser, I knew what this meant. Preferred stock in a private maritime conglomerate wasn't like owning shares of Apple. It didn't fluctuate with the daily market. It paid dividends, massive, consistent dividends. And it carried voting rights that could sway the direction of global shipping logistics. Based on the last valuation, I stammered doing the mental math. Vivian, these shares. They are worth $50 million. Vivian finished the sentence for me. Give or take a few million depending on the exchange rate. I stared at the woman sitting in the bed, the woman who had worn threadbare cardigans, the woman who had been yelled at for spilling soup, the woman who had been denied a $5,000 ambulance ride. You had $50 million this whole time, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. And you lived in that house. You let him treat you like that. Vivian sighed, looking down at her hands. I couldn't touch it, Claire. That is the catch. The trust was set up by my husband's father. He was a cruel, controlling man. He didn't trust women with money. He set up the trust so that I was the beneficiary. Yes, but I had no access to the principal. I could only live in the family home. The dividends were reinvested automatically until I reached the age of 75 or until a specific condition was met. She gestured to the document in my hand. Read the last page. Paragraph 4. The caretaker clause. I flipped to the back of the document. The text was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. In the event that the primary beneficiary, Vivian, becomes incapacitated or requires full-time care, the control of the trust principal and all accumulated dividends shall pass immediately and irrevocably to the appointed legal guardian of the beneficiary. I read it again. Control shall pass to the appointed legal guardian. My breath hitched. I looked at the date on the document. It was ironclad. It superseded any will, any probate court, any other claim. It continues. Vivian said, her voice steady. Read the exclusion. I looked down. Any family member who voluntarily relinquishes care, custody, or guardianship of the beneficiary shall be permanently disinherited and barred from receiving any funds from the trust, regardless of blood relation. The room spun. Derek didn't just sign a divorce paper. When he signed that waiver, when he signed over full guardianship to me to save $10,000, he activated the clause, Vivian said. She reached out and tapped the document. By giving me to you, he gave you the trust. He gave you the voting rights. He gave you the $50 million. And by signing that waiver claiming I was a burden he wanted no part of, he legally fired himself from the inheritance. I sat back in the chair, the parchment crinkling in my hand. I thought about the moment in the kitchen, the way Derek had thrown the money at me, the way Sienna had laughed, the way they had toasted to their freedom. He paid me $10,000 to take $50 million off his hands, I said, a bubble of laughter rising in my chest. It wasn't hysteria. It was pure, unadulterated delight. He thought he was smart, Vivian said, her eyes hard. He thought he was a businessman, but he forgot the first rule of business. Know the value of what you are selling. I looked at the box, I looked at the seal, and then I looked at my mother-in-law, who was no longer a victim, but a partner in the greatest heist in family history. We need to notify the trustee. I said, my mind already shifting into execution mode. We need to file the guardianship papers with the trust board in Zurich immediately. Do it, Vivian said. And Claire, yes, when you tell him, I want to see his face. I smiled a cold, sharp smile that matched hers. Oh, you will, Mom. I am going to make sure the whole world sees his face. I picked up the heavy iron seal from the box. It felt like a gavel in my hand. Derek wanted to build an empire. He wanted to be a tycoon. Well, he is about to find out that he just funded his own destruction. I walked to the desk and picked up the phone. I didn't call my lawyer this time. I called the number listed on the trust document. Good morning, I said when the Swiss banker answered. My name is Claire Vanderbilt. I am the legal guardian of Vivian Vanderbilt. I am calling to activate paragraph 4, and I would like to schedule a withdrawal. 30 days. That is exactly how long it takes for a house of cards to collapse if you pull the bottom card out with enough precision. For the last month, I had remained a ghost. I hadn't called Derek. I hadn't contested the divorce decree. I hadn't sent a single text message. To him, I was a defeated woman, likely living in a shelter, struggling to change adult diapers and count pennies for bread. He took my silence as victory. He thought he had won the war without firing a single shot. He was so confident in his triumph that he decided to throw the biggest party of his career. It was the official launch of his new software platform, a product that was barely functional, but wrapped in enough marketing buzzwords to fool a room full of eager investors. I wasn't at the party physically. I was sitting in the study of the penthouse sipping peppermint tea with Vivian, watching the live stream provided by the private security firm I had hired to monitor the event. The venue was the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, a location that cost $50,000 just to unlock the doors. Derek looked radiant. He was wearing a new tuxedo, standing on a raised platform with a microphone in hand. Sienna was next to him, draped in a gold sequined gown that screamed new money. She was clinging to his arm, beaming at the crowd of 200 potential investors, tech journalists, and social climbers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek boomed, his voice amplified across the room. "Thank you for being here tonight. This launch isn't just about a product. It is about shedding the old to make way for the new. It is about cutting the dead weight that holds us back and embracing a streamlined, efficient future." The crowd applauded. They didn't know he was talking about his mother and his wife. They thought he was talking about corporate synergy. Sienna kissed him on the cheek, playing the role of the supportive partner perfectly. "Let the champagne flow," Derek shouted. "Tonight, everything is on me." Waiters began circulating with trays of Dom Perignon and Beluga caviar. The music swelled. It was a scene of absolute excess. Then the moment arrived. I watched on the screen as the venue manager, a stern-faced man named Henri, approached Derek. Usually the bill is settled at the end of the night, but I had instructed my team to flag Derek's credit rating in the national banking database exactly 5 minutes ago. The sudden red flag would trigger a mandatory pre-authorization check for any transaction over $5,000. Henri whispered something in Derek's ear. Derek frowned, looking annoyed at the interruption during his moment of glory. He waved Henri away, but the manager stood his ground. He held out a wireless credit card terminal. I leaned closer to the screen. I could see Derek's lips move. "Fine," he mouthed. "Just run it now so you can leave me alone." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his black card, the Centurion, the symbol of his status. He slapped it onto the terminal with a flourish, not even looking at the screen. He turned back to an investor, laughing at a joke. Beep. The sound was sharp. Derek didn't notice. Henri frowned and inserted the card again. Beep. This time Derek turned. "What is the problem?" he asked, his voice loud enough to be picked up by the microphone he was still holding loosely in his other hand. "Mr. Vanderbilt Henri," said his voice polite but firm, "the card has been declined." A few heads turned. The music was still playing, but the people closest to the stage stopped talking. "Don't be ridiculous." Derek laughed, though the sound was tight. "There is no limit on that card. It is a Centurion. Try it again. Or maybe your machine is broken. Get another one." "I have tried it 3 times, Sir Henri," said, his patience thinning. "The code is 05. Do not honor." Derek's face flushed a deep crimson. He felt the eyes of the investors on him. He felt Sienna stiffen beside him. "Here," he said, pulling out a second card, "a platinum Visa. Use this one." Henri swiped it. Beep. Declined. "Use the corporate card," Derek snapped, now sweating. He fumbled for a third card. Beep. Declined. The room was growing quieter. The DJ, sensing the tension, lowered the volume of the music. The silence spread outward from the stage like a ripple in a pond. "There is a mistake," Derek announced to the room, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. "Just a banking glitch. You know how technology is." He pulled out his phone. "I am calling the private client line right now. We will sort this out in 10 seconds. He put the phone to his ear. Because he was flustered, or perhaps because he wanted to prove to everyone that the bank was at fault, he made the fatal mistake of putting the call on speakerphone. The automated voice was bypassed, quickly replaced by a live agent. "This is Derek Vanderbilt," he barked. "Why are my cards being declined? I have a room full of people here. Unfreeze them immediately." There was a pause. The agent's voice came through clear and professional, amplified by the silence of the ballroom. "Mr. Vanderbilt, We cannot unfreeze the accounts. Your assets have been seized pending a foreclosure action initiated 45 minutes ago. Foreclosure, Derek shouted. What are you talking about? I paid the mortgage last month. The mortgage is not the issue, sir, the agent replied. The issue is the collateral. The deed to your home and the commercial property housing your company were leveraged against your business lines of credit. The note holder has exercised a call option on the debt due to a violation of the lending covenants. Call option. Who holds the note I borrowed from the bank? The bank sold the debt package this morning, sir, the agent explained, to a private holding company called C&V International. They have demanded immediate liquidation of assets to cover the outstanding balance of $4 million. Since you do not have the cash on hand, they have frozen all associated accounts. C&V. Derek stammered. Who is C&V? I do not have that information, sir. But effective immediately, you have zero available credit. Have a nice day. Click. The line went dead. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. 200 people stared at Derek. The man who had just bragged about cutting dead weight had just been revealed as a man who didn't own the tuxedo on his back. Henri, the venue manager, stepped forward. He signaled to his staff. Stop serving, he commanded loudly. Clear the tables. Wait! Derek pleaded, grabbing Henri's arm. I can write a check. I can wire the money tomorrow. No payment, no party, Henri said coldly, shaking Derek off. Mr. Vanderbilt, you have 10 minutes to vacate the premises before I call the police for theft of services. The humiliation was total. The investors, the people Derek had spent years trying to impress, began to turn away. I saw them checking their phones, likely canceling the meetings they had scheduled with him. I saw them whispering, shaking their heads. Sienna looked at Derek. Her expression wasn't one of support. It was one of horror. She looked at the guests leaving, then at Derek, who was sweating profusely, his hands shaking. You said you were liquid, she hissed, her voice cutting through the air. You said you had millions. I do, Derek stammered. I did. It is a mistake, Sienna. It is just a glitch. Sienna pulled her arm away from his grip. This isn't a glitch, Derek. This is a foreclosure. You are broke. She turned and walked off the stage, leaving him standing there alone under the spotlight. I watched on the screen as Derek stood in the center of the empty ballroom floor, the decorations looking garish and cheap in the harsh light. He looked small. He looked confused. I took a sip of my tea. Happy anniversary, Derek, I whispered to the screen. Consider this my gift. The morning sun hit the glass facade of Vanderbilt Tech Solutions with a blinding intensity that matched the pounding headache behind Derek's eyes. He had spent the night in a cheap motel near the highway because his biometric locks at home had refused to recognize his fingerprint. He told himself it was just a system-wide glitch, a technical hiccup caused by the same banking error that had humiliated him at the party. He was convinced that once he got into his office, sat in his ergonomic leather chair and yelled at his chief financial officer, everything would reset. He believed he was still the king, just having a bad day. I watched him pull into the executive parking lot through the live feed of the security cameras I now controlled. He parked his leased BMW diagonally across two spaces, a habit he had developed to assert dominance even over painted lines on asphalt. He straightened his wrinkled tuxedo jacket, he hadn't had a change of clothes, and marched toward the revolving doors. He looked like a man ready to fire half his staff to make himself feel better. He didn't notice that the sign above the door was being removed. 2 workers on a lift were peeling the vinyl letters of his name off the glass. Derek walked up to the security turnstile and slapped his badge against the reader. Beep, red light, access denied. He frowned, tapping it again harder this time. Beep, red light, open the gate. Jerry. Derek barked at the security desk without looking up. This damn card is demagnetized again. But Jerry wasn't at the desk. Instead, a man I had hired named Stone, a former military contractor with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, stood slowly. He wore a black suit with a discreet earpiece. Mr. Vanderbilt Stone said, his voice flat and barring any argument. Your credentials have been revoked. Please step away from the turnstile. Derek laughed a short, incredulous bark. Revoked. Do you know who I am? I am the CEO. I own this building. Now open the gate before I have you fired and blacklisted from every security firm in the state." Stone didn't blink. He simply pointed to the elevators. "You are permitted a one-time escorted entry to the conference room for your exit interview. Any attempt to access the server room or your private office will result in immediate physical removal." Exit interview. Derek repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language. He pushed through the turnstile, forcing the metal bar to turn with his hip. Stone moved to intercept him, but then stepped back, allowing him to pass. It was part of the plan. I wanted him to make it upstairs. I wanted him to see the end of his world from the center of it. Derek stormed toward the elevators, jabbing the button. When the doors opened on the 20th floor, he stepped out ready to scream, but the scream died in his throat. The office was silent. Usually at 9 in the morning, the bullpen was buzzing with the sound of sales calls and coding keyboards. Today it was a graveyard. Cardboard boxes were stacked on every desk. Personal photos, potted plants, and stress balls were being packed away. But it wasn't the employees who were leaving. It was Derek's influence. The staff looked up as he walked down the central aisle. There was no fear in their eyes anymore. There was only curiosity, and in some cases barely concealed amusement. These were people Derek had belittled for years. He had cut their bonuses to pay for his car. He had denied their maternity leave requests while taking vacations to Cabo. Now they watched him walk the Green Mile in a stained tuxedo. "What is going on here?" Derek shouted, his voice cracking. "Why aren't you working? Get back to your screens. Who authorized this downtime?" Nobody moved. A young developer named Sarah, whom Derek had made cry just last week, simply took a sip of her coffee and turned back to her packing. Derek ran to his office. The glass door etched with his name was locked. He could see his desk inside, but his chair, his throne, was empty. He spun around and saw the conference room door open. Sitting at the head of the long mahogany table was not his CFO. It was a man he had never seen before, a man in a suit that cost more than Derek's car. This was Arthur Thorne, my lead corporate litigator, a man known in the city as the Shark in the Silk Suit. Derek burst into the room. "Who the hell are you?" Derek demanded, slamming his hands on the table. "Get out of my seat! Where is my finance team?" Mr. Thorne didn't stand up. He didn't offer a hand. He opened a leather folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. Mr. Vanderbilt Thorne said, his voice smooth and cold like polished steel. "Please sit down. We have a lot of paperwork to get through, and your access to the building expires in exactly 15 minutes. "I am not sitting down," Derek screamed. "This is a hostile takeover. You can't just walk in here. I own 60% of the voting shares. I am the majority shareholder." Thorne smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "Correction," Thorne said. "You owned 60% of the voting shares. However, those shares were pledged as collateral against the mezzanine loan you took out 3 years ago to fund your lifestyle expansion. You remember the terms of that loan, don't you? It contained a strict covenant regarding the debt-to-equity ratio." Derek went pale. He remembered. He had signed it without reading the fine print because he needed the cash to buy the Hamptons house. The covenant stated that if the company's liquid assets dropped below a certain threshold, the lender had the right to call the loan immediately, Thorne explained. Or, in the event of default, convert the debt into equity at a discounted rate. "So, what?" Derek stammered. "I missed a payment. I can write a check." "It is not about a missed payment," Thorne continued, tapping the paper. "It is about the $4 million in debt that was purchased yesterday by a private holding company. That company exercised the conversion clause at 9 o'clock this morning." Thorne paused for effect. "They converted the debt into stock, diluting your shares. As of 9:05 a.m., you own 12% of this company. The holding company owns 51%. Derek slumped into the nearest chair. His legs gave out. 51%, he whispered. "Which gives them controlling interest," Thorne said. "And their first act as the new majority board was to pass a motion." Thorne slid a second document across the table. It was a termination notice. Derek picked it up, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. "Termination for cause," Thorne read aloud. "Citing gross mismanagement of funds, embezzlement of corporate assets for personal use, and conduct detrimental to the company's reputation." Embezzlement. Derek choked out. "I never embezzled." Thorne pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen. A video played. It was the security footage from the kitchen recorded just yesterday morning. It showed Derek throwing the stack of cash at me. $10,000 withdrawn from the petty cash account, Thorne narrated. Thrown at your estranged wife as a bribe to facilitate an abandonment of a dependent. That is fraud, Mr. Vanderbilt. And the party last night, $200,000 charged to the company account for a personal branding event. That is misappropriation of funds. Derek stared at the screen. He saw himself arrogant and cruel throwing the money. He realized that the moment of his greatest victory had actually been his confession. "You can't do this," Derek whispered, tears of rage pricking his eyes. "I built this company. It is my name on the door." "We are changing the name tomorrow," Thorne said, closing the folder. "And as for your office security, we'll pack your personal effects and mail them to your... Well, I suppose we will have to mail them to a P.O. box since the house is also currently being seized." Derek stood up, his face purple. He looked around the room looking for a camera, looking for a way out. He realized he was trapped. The walls he had built to keep people out were now closing in to crush him. "Who is doing this?" Derek screamed, slamming his fist into the wall. "It is not a bank. Banks don't move this fast. Who bought the debt? Who is the holding company?" Thorne stood up. He was tall, imposing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cream-colored business card. It was thick, embossed with gold lettering. "The new owners wanted you to have this," Thorne said. "They said you might recognize the initials." Derek snatched the card from Thorne's hand. He held it up to the light. "C&V Holdings." He stared at the letters. "C, V, C, and V," he muttered. "Carter and Vance. Capital Ventures. Think closer to home," Derek Thorne said softly. Derek looked at the card again. His eyes widened. His breath hitched in his throat. "C..." Claire and Vivian Thorne finished the sentence. Derek dropped the card as if it were burning hot. He staggered back, hitting the wall. "No," he gasped. "That is impossible. She is broke. She is a housewife. She doesn't have $4 million. She begged me for gas money." "She has $50 million, Thorne corrected him. "Or rather, the trust she now controls has $50 million. The trust you signed away because you didn't want to pay for her medication." The realization hit Derek like a physical blow. He remembered the waiver. He remembered the laughter. He remembered calling his mother a burden. He had handed me the gun, loaded it, and then placed his forehead against the barrel. "She played me," Derek whispered, his voice broken. "The whole time, she played me." Thorne checked his watch. "Your 15 minutes are up, Mr. Vanderbilt. Security will escort you out." Stone appeared at the door. He didn't grab Derek. He didn't have to. Derek looked like a man who had already been destroyed. As Derek walked out of the conference room clutching the business card in his hand, he looked across the bullpen. Sarah, the developer, looked up one last time. She caught his eye, and then slowly, deliberately, she waved goodbye. Derek walked to the elevator. He didn't look back. He pressed the down button, descending from the tower he thought he owned, down to the street where he belonged. Back in the penthouse, Vivian and I watched him leave the building. I saw him stand on the sidewalk, looking up at the sky, looking for the invisible enemy that had struck him down. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I picked up the phone and dialed Thorne. "Good job, Arthur," I said. "Now release the press statement. Let the world know why he was fired." I hung up and turned to Vivian. She was smiling, holding the wooden box in her lap. "One down," she said. "One to go," I replied. We turned our attention to the next target on the list, Sienna. Her bill was coming due. The drive back to the Hamptons was a blur of red brake lights and suffocating panic. Derek drove with one hand on the wheel and the other clutching the termination notice, as if staring at the paper would somehow change the words printed on it. He arrived at the estate just as the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn that was no longer his. He expected to find Sienna waiting for him with a stiff drink and a plan. He expected her to be outraged on his behalf, to call her father's connections to help him fight the injustice of it all. After all, she had told him 1,000 times that they were a power couple, a team that could conquer the world. He burst through the front door, bypassing the biometric lock that was miraculously still functioning for the moment. "Sienna!" He called out, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged foyer. "Sienna, you won't believe what they did. It is a conspiracy. We need to call your lawyer, Dad." There was no answer. He walked into the living room. It was empty. The kitchen was empty, the dirty champagne glasses from the morning still sitting on the counter, sticky with residue. Then he heard it. The distinctive rhythmic zip of luggage being closed. He ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time. He threw open the door to the master bedroom. The room was in chaos. The contents of the walk-in closet had been vomited out onto the bed. Silk dresses, designer shoes, and handbags were piled high. Sienna was standing in the middle of the storm, furiously stuffing a Louis Vuitton duffel bag with the jewelry he had bought her. Sienna Derrick breathed relief washing over him. "Thank God, you are packing. That is smart. We should go to your apartment in the city until this blows over. The bank froze the accounts, but once I sue them for wrongful termination, we will be back on top." Sienna didn't look up. She didn't pause. She grabbed a handful of cashmere sweaters and shoved them into the bag, not bothering to fold them. "I am going to the city, Derrick," she said, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. "But you are not coming with me." Derrick froze in the doorway. "What? What do you mean?" Sienna zipped the bag shut with a violent yank. She stood up and turned to face him. The adoration he was used to seeing in her eyes was gone. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "It is over, Derrick," she said. "I saw the news. I saw the stock plummet. You are radioactive." "It is a mistake," Derrick pleaded, stepping into the room. "It is a hostile takeover. Claire is behind it. She tricked me." "I don't care who is behind it," Sienna snapped. "I care about the result. And the result is that you are unemployed, bankrupt, and homeless." "But we love each other," Derrick stammered. "You said I was your soulmate." Sienna laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that cut him deeper than the termination letter. "Oh, grow up, Derrick. I loved the CEO of Vanderbilt Tech. I loved the black card. I loved the access. I didn't love the man who throws temper tantrums and gets outsmarted by his mousy wife." She walked past him to the vanity table, sweeping his expensive colognes into the trash can to make room for her makeup case. "You are a failure, Derrick, and I don't date failures. It is bad for my brand." Derrick felt his knees give way. He slumped against the doorframe. "But I did this for us. I kicked my mother out for us. I sold her to Claire so we could have this house to ourselves. And look how that turned out." Sienna said, snapping the makeup case shut. "You sold your own mother for a renovation project you can't even afford. It is pathetic, really." She hoisted the heavy bag onto her shoulder and grabbed the handle of her rolling suitcase. She marched toward the door, forcing Derrick to step aside. "Wait," Derrick said, grabbing her arm. "You can't just leave." "Where will you go?" Sienna shook him off, as if his touch burned. "I am going to Harrison's place," she said casually. "Harrison." Derrick blinked. "Harrison Wells. My biggest competitor." Sienna smirked. It was a cruel, triumphant expression. "He has been trying to poach me for months, Derrick, and let's just say the interview process was very thorough. He knows all about your source code. He knows about your client list. I made sure he has everything he needs to crush whatever is left of your company." Derrick stared at her, the blood draining from his face. You gave him my secrets. You slept with him." Sienna shrugged. "He is a winner, Derrick. He owns his company. He doesn't borrow against it to buy cars. And he certainly doesn't let his ex-wife humiliate him publicly." She leaned in close, whispering the final dagger into his heart. "By the way, that launch party last night, Harrison paid for my dress. He wanted me to look good when your credit card declined. He was watching the live stream. We both were." She stepped back, adjusting her bag. "Goodbye, Derrick. Don't call me. I blocked your number 10 minutes ago." She walked down the hallway, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Derrick stood paralyzed in the bedroom. He heard the front door open. He heard it close. And then he heard the roar of an Uber pulling away from the curb. He was alone. The silence of the house was absolute. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a home. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a tomb. He looked around the room. The bed was stripped. The closet was empty. The only thing left was the smell of her perfume, lingering in the air like a ghost of the life he had destroyed. Derek sat on the floor of the living room, a bottle of warm whiskey in his hand. The power had been cut an hour ago, another casualty of the asset freeze. The only light came from the moon streaming through the massive windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. His phone, miraculously still holding a 10% charge, sat on the floor beside him. He stared at it, willing it to ring. He wanted anyone to call and tell him this was a nightmare. Then it rang. The screen lit up the dark room. It was Chloe. Derek snatched the phone up. "Chloe, thank God. You have to help me. Can I stay at your place? The bank took everything. Sienna left me. I have nowhere to go." He expected sympathy. He expected his sister to rally around him. Instead, he heard a sound he had never heard before. Chloe was screaming. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure hysterical rage. "You idiot," Chloe shrieked. "You absolute moronic idiot." "Chloe, what is wrong?" "Turn on the news," Chloe yelled. "Turn it on right now." "I can't," Derek said. "The power is out. My phone is dying." "Just tell me. You didn't check the trust." She screamed, her voice breaking. "You told me Mom was broke. You told me she had nothing but knitting needles." "She was broke," Derek shouted back. "She was a burden. She is worth $50 million. Derek. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. What Derek whispered. Chloe was sobbing now, heavy, gasping breaths. "It is all over the internet. The Vanderbilt Family Trust. It was dormant for 30 years. It just activated. Mom is the sole beneficiary. But the control goes to the guardian." Derek felt the room spin. The whiskey bottle slipped from his fingers and rolled across the floor, spilling amber liquid onto the rug. "No," he breathed. "That is not true. Mom lived on Social Security. She couldn't afford brand-name cereal. She couldn't access it." Chloe screamed. "It was locked until she needed care, and we gave her away. We signed the papers. Derek, we signed the waiver." Derek scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. I can fix this," he stammered. "I will call Sterling. We can rescind the waiver. We can say we were under duress. We can say Claire tricked us. You can't do anything." Chloe wailed. "I just got served, Derek. A process server just left my porch. It is a court order, a declaratory judgment." "What does it say?" Derek demanded, his grip on the phone tightening. "It confirms the validity of the waiver," Chloe sobbed. "It says we voluntarily, knowingly, and irrevocably terminated our rights. It cites the video called Derek, the one where we laughed about her diapers. They have the transcript. We are disinherited, permanently." Derek dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a crack. Chloe's voice continued to tinily scream from the speaker, but he couldn't hear the words anymore. $50 million. He walked to the window, his legs moving like lead. He looked out at the dark driveway where his BMW used to be parked before the repo men took it an hour ago. He thought about the $10,000 he had thrown at Claire. He thought about the way he had mocked her. He had paid her $10,000 to take a $50 million fortune out of his house. He sank to his knees, his forehead pressing against the cold glass. A sound ripped from his throat, a guttural roar of anguish that shook the empty house. "No," he screamed. "It is mine. It is my money. I am the son." Suddenly, headlights swept across the lawn. A car was coming up the driveway. Derek scrambled up. Hope flared in his chest. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a lawyer coming to tell him he could fight this. He ran to the door and threw it open. A nondescript sedan sat idling. A man in a cheap windbreaker walked up the steps. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked bored. "Derek Vanderbilt?" the man asked. "Yes," Derek said breathlessly. "Are you from the trust?" The man handed him a thick envelope. "You have been served, courtesy of C&V Holdings." The man turned and walked back to his car. Derek tore the envelope open right there on the porch. He held the papers up to the moonlight. It wasn't a settlement offer. It was an eviction notice. And behind it, a copy of the trust document with one paragraph highlighted in neon yellow. The caretaker clause. Derek read the words. He saw his own signature on the attached waiver. It looked like a child's scrawl. He stared at the paper until his eyes burned. The realization didn't bring sadness. It brought a cold, hard fury. She knew, he whispered. She knew the whole time. She sat at my table, ate my food, and plotted to steal my birthright. He crushed the papers in his fist. She thinks she has won, he snarled to the darkness. She thinks she can just take my mother and my money and live in a tower while I rot in the street. He turned and looked at his reflection in the dark window. He looked deranged. His tuxedo was torn, his hair wild, his eyes bloodshot. But he didn't see a loser. He saw a victim. He saw a man who had been wronged. I am not signing anything, he muttered. I am going to see her. He patted his pockets. He had no car keys. He had no credit cards. He had $20 in his wallet. He walked down the driveway past the foreclosure sign the bank had already planted in the lawn. He walked to the main road. He would take a train. He would take a bus. He didn't care. I am coming for you, Claire, he hissed as he began the long walk to the station. And I am not leaving until I get what is mine. He didn't know that he was walking into a lion's den. He didn't know that the woman waiting for him in the Sovereign Tower wasn't the wife he had bullied for 5 years. She was the executioner, and he was delivering himself to the block. The lobby of the Sovereign Tower is designed to make you feel small. The ceilings soar 3 stories high, supported by pillars of black marble that gleam under the soft ambient lighting. The air is always cool, scented with white tea and absolute silence. It is a sanctuary for the untouchables of New York society, a place where the noise and grime of the city are filtered out before they can touch the residents. But today, that silence was shattered by the desperate, ragged breathing of a man who had lost everything. I stood on the mezzanine level, looking down through the glass railing. Vivian sat beside me in her new state-of-the-art electric wheelchair. We watched the security monitors that showed the scene unfolding at the front desk. Derek had arrived. He did not look like the swaggering CEO who had thrown $10,000 at my face a month ago. He looked like a man who had walked 5 miles in dress shoes that were never meant to touch concrete. His tuxedo shirt was stained with sweat and dirt. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was wild and windblown. He was flushed, panting, and terrified. Beside him was Chloe. She was waving a piece of paper, the eviction notice, like a weapon. Her mascara was running and she was shrieking at the head concierge, a man named James who had served royalty and was currently looking at my husband and sister-in-law as if they were stray dogs who had wandered in from the rain. Trailing behind them was Marcus. He looked different. He wasn't frantic. He was wearing a dark suit, his hands in his pockets, standing a good 10 feet away from his wife and brother-in-law. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He was observing the architecture of the building, the security cameras, the sheer impenetrable wealth of the place. He knew he didn't belong here, but unlike Derek, he wasn't trying to break the door down. He was just waiting for the inevitable crash. I heard Derek's voice echo up to the mezzanine. "Call her down," he screamed, slamming his hand on the marble desk. "I know she is here. I saw the address on the court papers. Tell Claire Vanderbilt her husband is here." "Sir," James replied, his voice calm and unbothered. "I cannot confirm or deny the residency of any individual in this building. If you are not on the guest list, you must leave." "I am not a guest," Derek yelled, his voice cracking. "I am family. I am the son. Do you hear me? I am the son." Chloe chimed in, leaning over the desk. "We have rights. She has our mother. She kidnapped an elderly woman with dementia. If you don't let us up, we are calling the police." James simply picked up the phone. "I would advise against that, madam. However, I will call security to escort you out." "No." Derek lunged for the elevator bank. 2 massive security guards who had been standing discreetly by the pillars stepped forward. They blocked his path like a human wall. Derek bounced off the chest of the larger guard, stumbling back. I looked at Vivian. She was watching her children on the screen. Her face was unreadable. There was no anger, no sadness, just a cold, hard recognition of who they really were. "Are you ready?" I asked her. Vivian adjusted the silk shawl around her shoulders. She touched the pearl necklace that rested against her throat, pearls that were real heavy and lustrous. "Let's go," she said. "I want to look him in the eye." We took the private elevator down. The descent was smooth and silent. I checked my reflection in the mirrored walls. I was wearing a bespoke cream suit from a designer Derek had always told me was too expensive. My hair was pulled back in a sleek, severe bun. I wore no jewelry except for my wedding ring, which I had moved to my right hand. It was a reminder, not a promise. The elevator chimed as it reached the lobby. The sound cut through the shouting at the front desk. Derek stopped screaming. Chloe froze. Even James, the concierge, paused and looked toward the gold-plated doors. The doors slid open. I stepped out first. The click of my heels on the marble floor was sharp and authoritative. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a woman who owns the ground she walks on. Claire, Derek whispered. He stared at me. He looked confused. He was searching for the mousy, hunched woman in the oversized cardigan. He was searching for the wife who apologized for existing. Instead, he found a woman who looked like she could buy his entire life with the change in her pocket. Then the elevator doors opened wider. Vivian drove her chair out. The silence that fell over the lobby was absolute. Derek's jaw literally dropped. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her throat. They were expecting a frail, dying old woman. They were expecting the burden they had sold. Instead, they saw a queen. Vivian sat upright, her posture regal. Her skin glowed with health. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant bob. She was wearing a cashmere set that screamed quiet luxury. But it was her eyes that stopped them. They were sharp. They were blue ice. They were locked on her son. Mom, Derek choked out. He took a step forward, his eyes darting from her face to the pearls, then to the expensive wheelchair, and finally to the expansive, wealthy lobby around us. His brain was trying to recalibrate. He was trying to reconcile the mother he had thrown in the basement with the matriarch sitting before him. And then the greed kicked in. I saw it happen in real time. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He realized the rumors were true. He realized the money was real, and instantly the mask of the grieving son slid into place. "Mom," he cried out, his voice trembling with a performance that would have shamed a soap opera actor. "Oh my God, Mom, you are okay." He rushed past the security guards. This time, they let him pass, waiting for my signal. Derek ran toward us, his arms wide open, tears instantly springing to his eyes. I was so worried he sobbed, reaching for her. "I didn't know where you were. Claire took you. She took you in the middle of the night. I have been looking everywhere for you." He fell to his knees in front of the wheelchair, grabbing the armrest. He tried to grab Vivian's hand, the same hand he had slapped away a month ago when she tried to touch his arm. "Mom, please, you have to listen to me," he pleaded, his voice thick with desperation. "I was tricked. Claire lied to me. She told me you needed to go to a facility. I never wanted to sign those papers. She forced me." He looked up at her, his face a mask of sweaty, pathetic earnestness. "I love you, Mom. You know I love you. I am your son." "You're Derek. I would never hurt you. I was stressed. The business, the money. I wasn't thinking straight. But I am here now. I am here to take you home." Chloe ran up behind him, nodding furiously. She looked at Vivian's pearls with a hunger that was terrifying to witness. "Yes, Mom," Chloe cried. "We were so scared. Derek has been crying every night. We didn't mean any of it. The waiver. That was just a legal mistake. We didn't know what we were signing." She reached out to touch the cashmere shawl draped over Vivian's legs. "You look so good, Mom," Chloe cooed. "You look rich. Healthy. You look healthy. Come on, let's get you out of here. This place is cold. We will take you back to Derek's house. We will set up your room again, the one with the garden view." Derek nodded eagerly, wiping his nose on his dirty sleeve. "Yes. The garden room. I kicked Sienna out, Mom. She is gone. It is just us now, the family. We can be a family again. Just tell these people to unfreeze my accounts. Tell them to give me back my company. You can do that, right? You have the money now. You can fix this." He looked at Vivian with pleading puppy dog eyes. He truly believed it. He believed that all he had to do was say sorry, shed a few fake tears, and his mother would open her checkbook. He believed that the bond of blood was a blank check that he could cash forever, no matter how much he had abused it. I stood silently watching him. I didn't intervene. I wanted Vivian to see this. I wanted her to see him begging not for her love, but for her leverage. Derek grabbed Vivian's hand, squeezing it tight. "Come on, Mom," he whispered. "Let's go home. You and me. We don't need Claire. She is just an outsider. She doesn't love you like I do." Vivian looked down at him. She looked at his dirty hand gripping her clean skin. She looked at the sweat dripping from his forehead. She looked at the desperation in his eyes that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with bankruptcy. For a long moment, she didn't move. Derek's smile faltered slightly. He searched her face for the softness, the confusion, the unconditional forgiveness he had exploited for 40 years. But he found only a mirror reflecting his own ugliness. Vivian slowly, deliberately pulled her hand away from his grip. She did it with a strength that shocked him. She brushed her hand against her shawl as if wiping away dirt. Mom Derek whispered, his voice trembling for real this time. Vivian didn't speak to him. She didn't scream. She simply raised her right hand, lifting one finger in the air. It was a small gesture, a subtle gesture. But in the silence of the lobby, it was a thunderclap. The two massive security guards who had been standing by the elevator moved. They didn't walk. They swarmed. In one fluid motion, they stepped between Derek and the wheelchair. One of them grabbed Derek by the back of his tuxedo jacket and hauled him to his feet like a misbehaving child. The other stepped in front of Chloe, forcing her back with a wall of muscle. "Hey, Derek," shouted, struggling against the guard's grip. "Let go of me! That is my mother, Mom! Tell them to stop!" Vivian looked at him through the gap between the guards. She adjusted her shawl again, her expression serene and terrifyingly calm. "I have no son," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was the voice of a woman who had burned the bridge and was now watching the ashes float away. "What?" Derek gasped, hanging limp in the guard's grip. "You sold your mother for $10,000, Vivian said, her voice icy. "You signed a waiver. You declared me a burden. You wished me dead to save money on ambulance fees." She leaned forward slightly, her blue eyes piercing him. "You got what you wanted, Derek. You are free of the burden. And I am free of the parasite." She looked at the head of security. "Remove them. They are trespassing." "No!" Derek screamed as the guard began to drag him backward toward the revolving doors. "Mom, no, I am sorry, I didn't mean it. I need the money. I need the trust." Chloe began to wail, trying to run toward us, but the second guard blocked her path. "Mom, please, I have debt. I will lose my condo." Vivian didn't look at them. She pressed the joystick on her chair and turned it around, presenting her back to her screaming children. "Let's go, Claire," she said to me. "The air down here is polluted." I smiled at Marcus, who was still standing by the pillar. He hadn't moved. He hadn't tried to help them. He just nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement of the justice he was witnessing. I turned and followed Vivian back to the elevator. Behind us, the sounds of Derek screaming, "I am the heir, it is my money," faded as the heavy gold doors slid shut, sealing us back into our sanctuary. The security guards held Derek firmly by the arms, his expensive tuxedo jacket bunching up around his shoulders. He was still struggling, his face slick with sweat, his eyes fixed on Vivian with a desperate, manic intensity. He looked like a man watching a lifeboat drift away while he trod water in a freezing ocean. "Mom, please!" Derek shouted, his voice cracking. "Just listen to me. I made a mistake. I admit it. I made a bad business deal, but you can't punish me forever. I am your flesh and blood. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Vivian sat in her wheelchair, unmoving as a statue carved from ice. She watched his performance with a detached curiosity, as if she were observing a stranger having a breakdown in public. The silence in the lobby was heavy, amplifying every ragged breath Derek took. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying clarity that cut through the hysteria. "You are right, Derek. Flesh and blood means something. It means you protect each other. It means you sacrifice for each other." Derek nodded frantically, hope flaring in his eyes. Yes, exactly. That is what I am saying. We are family. But you stopped being my family the moment you looked at a spreadsheet and decided I was too expensive to keep alive. Vivian continued, her tone dropping lower, vibrating with suppressed power. She rolled her wheelchair forward just an inch, invading his personal space. You don't miss me, Derek. You miss my wallet. You miss the safety net you thought you were entitled to. You are not crying because you lost your mother. You are crying because you lost your bankroll. No, Mom, that is not true, Derek stammered. It is entirely true, Vivian cut him off. You put a price tag on our relationship. You calculated the cost of my medication against the cost of your car lease. You weighed the value of my comfort against the value of your mistress's wardrobe. And you made a deal. She leaned forward, her blue eyes locking onto his. $10,000. That was the number. That was the appraisal value you placed on my life. You paid Claire $10,000 to haul me away like construction debris. I didn't know about the trust, Derek screamed. If I had known. If you had known, you would have treated me like a queen, Vivian said, a cruel smile touching her lips. You would have visited me every day. You would have brought me flowers, not because you loved me, but because you wanted the payout. And that is why I am glad you didn't know. Because for the first time in my life, I saw the truth. I saw exactly what I was worth to you without the money attached. She sat back, adjusting her shawl with a finality that felt like a gavel strike. I have accepted your valuation, Derek. You sold your mother for $10,000. The transaction is complete. There are no refunds. There are no exchanges. You made your sale. Now live with the profit. Derek slumped in the guard's grip. The fight drained out of him. He realized that the emotional manipulation that had worked for decades was useless against this new, hardened version of his mother. He looked around wildly for an ally. His eyes landed on Marcus. Marcus, Derek yelled, "Do something! You are a lawyer! Tell them this is illegal! Tell them they can't kick me out!" Marcus had been standing quietly by the pillar, his hands in his pockets, watching the scene unfold with a somber expression. At Derek's shout, he slowly walked forward. Thank God, Derek breathed. Marcus, get these goons off me. We need to file an emergency injunction. We need to freeze the assets before she spends it all. Marcus stopped in front of Derek. He didn't look at the guards. He didn't look at Vivian. He looked straight at his brother-in-law. I have a filing for you, Derek, Marcus said calmly, but it is not an injunction. He reached into his inner suit pocket. Derek looked at him with confusion. Marcus pulled out a thick folded document. It wasn't a business card. It was a subpoena. What is this? Derek asked. It is a grand jury indictment, Marcus said, his voice steady and professional. Indictment. For who? For you, Derek. For embezzlement. For securities fraud. And for tax evasion. Derek stared at the paper as Marcus tucked it into the breast pocket of his ruined tuxedo. You are working with them, Derek whispered. You are my family. You are my brother-in-law. I am the general counsel for your company. Derek, Marcus corrected him, which means my fiduciary duty is to the corporation, not to the CEO, especially not to a CEO who has been siphoning corporate funds into offshore shell accounts for 3 years. Marcus stepped back, adjusting his tie. Did you think I didn't notice the discrepancies in the quarterly audits? Did you think I didn't see the transfers to the consulting firms that were registered to your mistress's apartment address? I warned you, Derek. I told you 6 months ago that the books were cooked. You told me to shut up and sign the papers. Marcus looked at him with a mix of pity and disdain. I didn't shut up. I started collecting evidence. I have been cooperating with the district attorney for weeks. I wasn't going to let you drag me down to prison with you. I have a wife to protect, even if she is your sister. Derek looked at Marcus as if he had been stabbed. The betrayal was total. The one person he thought was too weak, too passive, too grateful to be in the family, had been the one building the cage around him. You rat, Derek hissed. You ungrateful rat. Marcus ignored him. He turned to me. He walked past the screaming Derek and the sobbing Chloe. He stopped in front of me and bowed his head slightly. Claire, he said softly. Marcus. I replied, acknowledging him. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a flash drive. This contains the rest of the forensic accounting files you asked for, he said, handing it to me. It connects the petty cash withdrawal he threw at you directly to the corporate reserve accounts. It proves the intent to defraud both the company and the family court. It is the final nail in the coffin. Thank you, Marcus, I said, taking the drive. I knew I could count on you. I have been waiting for this day for a long time, Marcus said, looking at Derek one last time. I watched how he treated you. I watched how he treated Vivian. I couldn't stop him then, but I can certainly make sure he pays for it now. He turned to Vivian. Mrs. Vanderbilt, he said respectfully. It is good to see you looking like yourself again. Thank you, Marcus. Vivian nodded. You always were the smartest one in the room. I am sorry it took me so long to realize it. Derek let out a roar of inarticulate rage, trying to lunge at Marcus, but the guards tightened their grip. I will kill you, Derek screamed. I will sue you all. I will burn this whole building down. James. The concierge picked up the phone at the front desk. Police are en route, he announced calmly over the lobby speakers. ETA 2 minutes. I looked at Derek, foaming at the mouth, stripped of his dignity, his money, and his family. It is over, Derek, I said quietly. You wanted a life without burdens. Now you have it. You have nothing left to carry. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers reflected off the polished marble walls of the lobby, creating a chaotic strobe effect that matched the disintegration of Derek's life. 4 officers marched through the revolving doors, their expressions grim and businesslike. They didn't need to ask who the suspect was. Derek was the only one screaming threats of arson and murder. Mr. Vanderbilt, one of the officers said, grabbing Derek's wrist and twisting it behind his back. You are under arrest for grand larceny and securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent. I advise you to use it, Marcus called out from the sidelines, his voice cutting through Derek's incoherent babbling. Though knowing you, you will talk your way into an extra 5 years before you even reach the station. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the sweetest melody I had ever heard. It was the sound of a chapter closing. It was the sound of consequences finally catching up to a man who thought he could outrun them. Derek tried to look back at us as they dragged him out. Mom, Claire, don't let them take me. I am a Vanderbilt. I am rich. You are an inmate, Vivian whispered, not even turning her head to watch him go. Chloe, who had been paralyzed by shock, suddenly snapped out of it. She realized her brother was gone, her safety net was gone, and she was standing alone in the lobby with the people she had tormented. Mom, she wailed, rushing toward the wheelchair. Mom, I didn't know. I swear, Marcus tricked me too. I am innocent. Please, I can't lose the house. I have nowhere to go. She reached out to grab Vivian's hand, but I stepped in front of her. I didn't need security. My presence was enough. I stared down at my sister-in-law, the woman who had laughed while I packed her mother's clothes into trash bags. Chloe, I said, my voice ice cold. Claire, please, she sobbed, mascara running down her face. We are sisters. We were never sisters, I corrected her. You treated me like a servant. You treated your mother like a nuisance. And now you want to be family because you saw the bank balance. I pointed to the door. Go home, Chloe, while you still have one. Although based on the foreclosure notices I saw on Marcus's flash drive, I suggest you start packing. You have about a week before the sheriff comes for you too. But, Mom, Chloe pleaded, looking around me. Vivian turned her chair away. James. Vivian said to the concierge, please ensure the lobby is cleared of all trash. Yes, Madam, James said, gesturing to the security guards. Chloe was escorted out, weeping and wailing, her heels dragging on the marble floor. She looked small and pathetic, a stark contrast to the arrogant woman who had thrown a brochure for a nursing home at my feet. The revolving doors spun one last time, spitting her out into the cold New York night. The silence returned to the lobby. It was peaceful. Shall we go upstairs? Marcus asked, offering his arm to me. I think that is an excellent idea, I smiled. 6 months later, the boardroom of the Vanderbilt Foundation was filled with sunlight. It was a space of warmth and productivity, a far cry from the cold, sterile offices Derek had tried to run. I sat at the head of the table, reviewing the grant proposals for the new elder care initiative we were launching. The program provided legal aid and high-quality housing for seniors who had been financially exploited by their families. It was fully funded by the dividends from the Maritime shares money that Derek would have spent on sports cars. Vivian sat to my right. She looked radiant. She was no longer just a beneficiary. She was the active chairwoman of the board. She reviewed every application personally. Her mind was sharp, her heart was full, and she was known in the city as a fierce advocate for the vulnerable. Marcus sat at the other end of the table. He was our chief legal officer now. He had divorced Chloe 3 months ago, a messy affair that ended with him keeping his dignity and her losing everything. He looked 10 years younger without the weight of the toxic Vanderbilt siblings on his shoulders. "We have approved the funding for the Sunnyvale renovation," Marcus announced, sliding a file toward me. "We bought the facility. We are firing the entire management staff and bringing in our own team. No more bedbugs. No more sedation. It is going to be a sanctuary." Vivian smiled, touching the file gently. "That is the best news I have heard all week," she said. "To think they wanted to send me there to die. Now we are going to make it a place where people can live." I looked around the table. I looked at the team we had built. We had taken the wreckage of a dysfunctional family and built a fortress of kindness and power. And Derek, he was currently awaiting trial in Rikers Island. His bail had been denied due to flight risk. He spent his days in a 6x8 cell wearing a jumpsuit that cost less than the handkerchiefs he used to use. I heard from Marcus that he spends his time writing letters to Vivian begging for money. Vivian burns them unopened. Chloe was working as a hostess at a mid-tier restaurant in New Jersey, living in a studio apartment she struggled to afford. She had tried to sell her story to the tabloids, but without proof, no one cared about the ramblings of a bitter, disinherited woman. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. I thought about the night I spilled the soup. I thought about the night I gathered the $10,000 off the floor. I had been on my knees then. Now I was touching the sky. I turned back to Vivian and Marcus. "Ready for the next meeting?" I asked. "Always," Vivian said, her eyes sparkling. I realized then that revenge wasn't just about destroying your enemies. It was about thriving in spite of them. It was about taking the stones they threw at you and building a castle. Derek had thrown me away. He had thrown his mother away. And in doing so, he had given us the greatest gift of all, each other, and the freedom to be who we were always meant to be. Sometimes the most expensive thing you ever lose is the person you didn't value. Derek learned that lesson the hard way. If you believe that Derek deserved to lose his millions for betraying his mother, smash that like button right now. And if you have ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life to save yourself, tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. See you in the next video.